That's a continuation of our meeting last week, really, so I have nothing new to say other than the reference to the Globe column, which I think is no surprise. And today's agenda, 3 items: issues ID, detailed design, and then schematic. So I think we have one conflict declaration, Matthew, is that correct? Anyone else?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. No. Yeah. Okay. Any updates you want to cover from last week?
No, we don't have any updates this week. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
just let this be a part 2 of those updates from last week. Yeah.
And obviously, minutes and everything else are all to come from last week. So it's great. Okay, so I guess ready to start the first item, 190 Cherry Street, which is issues ID. I guess the people are outside. You want to get them
they're in
in?
the other room. So
Yep.
they're coming. Great.
Paul, just a note as well, I have to leave at 2 o'clock, so I won't be joining for the last 2 items.
Yeah, I've got a note on that. Thanks,
Okay.
Matt.
Thank you.
Must be the weather. Gorgeous.
I have to teach this afternoon.
Yeah.
Take your class outside.
Yeah. It's gonna be 23 or something.
Is that right?
It's crazy. It's crazy. No.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexa Legg, and I am a planner with Community Planning and Development Review with the City of Toronto. And I am joined by Anthony Kittle, Project Manager for the Portlands and Community Planning, and also Julie Dingowitz, a Senior Urban Design Planner who will also be presenting today. And also joining virtually to help answer panel questions will be Jeevithan Rajendram in Transportation Services, Leora Zion Burton, and Kelsey Taylor in Environmental Planning. So this application at 190 Cherry Street is for a 3-story Porsche downtown dealership and vehicle service shop in the Portlands, and it is located in the Polson Quay. And this is an interesting proposal because it's the first major development to come into the Polson Quay since the Portlands planning first took place. And it creates an opportunity for some additional employment and retail into Polson Quay. And this is also important to note, it's on city-owned land and is currently leased by Creatio to the proponent. So next slide, please. So this is located at the corner of Polson Street and Cherry Street. It has a frontage of approximately 56 meters along Cherry Street and approximately 156 meters along Polson Street. Along Cherry Street also, along the frontage, is the Martin Goodman Trail, which is a major multi-use trail that runs along the waterfront in Toronto. And here you can see it is within the Polson Quay, which is outlined in blue on the slide. And this entire map really highlights the existing non-use residential context in the Polson Quay, which is currently
Sorry about that.
Good. All right, thanks. So there's currently a mix of industrial and entertainment uses in this district. So just north of the site is the Lafarge Canada Cement Complex, which is a listed heritage site. And looking west, directly adjacent to the property is the Dominion Boxboard building, which is also a listed heritage building. And it was an incubator for small media related companies. And looking further west, there's Rebel Nightclub, Capana Pool Bar, and some lower scale office uses and other sports entertainment uses and parking. And at the very end of Polson Street is Jennifer Katerina Kowalski Park. And directly south of the site is the Docks driving range. And then to the east is the South River precinct of the Portlands. Next slide, please. So here you can see an updated aerial image from October 2024, so more recent. And this highlights the proximity of the site to the Portland's flood protection parks and river. That is to the northeast of the subject lands. And so it shows that it's essentially kitty corner to this new park. And then this image also shows the site in relation to the newly constructed Cherry Street Road realignment and bridge. Next slide, please. So this site context photo shows the northeast corner of the site looking southwest from the intersection of Polson and Cherry Street. And then here looking into the site, you can see the previously existing parking lot that was on the site. And then you can also see some construction in this photo. The construction on Cherry Street was completed to the north of the site, terminating at Polson. And in the future, Cherry Street will be reconstructed south of Polson with a design that is more consistent with the newly constructed northern portion. And the timeline for this has not been determined. And next slide, please. And Anthony will get into some of the Cherry Street
And
context.
just a very, very quick context with regard to the work taken as part of the Portland flood protection and enabling infrastructure project. So Cherry Street was reconstructed from Lakeshore Boulevard to New Munition Street, including the addition of 2 new bridges, as well as the reconstruction of Commissioner Street from the new alignment of Cherry Street to Don Roadway, and also Don Roadway was reconstructed from Lakeshore Boulevard east to Commissioner Street. And where Cherry Street, next slide please. And Cherry Street's character is a very broad pedestrian clearway of approximately 3.1 meters with a cycle track that's approximately 4 meters wide. And that is actually the new alignment of the Martin Goodman Trail, 2-lane traffic. And in the future, there will be an LRT that extends all the way to Polson Street with a transit loop that will be designed once we're able to move forward with precinct planning in South River. So what you're seeing on this slide is the transition between the newly constructed Cherry Street alignments and tying that into the existing Cherry Street. Because, of course, that very complicated transition of Martin Goodman Trail from the west to the east. That will be reconstructed in the future, so that it will be a design that's very similar to what was approved and designed as part of Portland's flood protection. Next slide. And this just provides an overview of the alignments we do have at that transition. Next slide. And so this is the Polson Street existing alignment and cross section. So as you can see, it is a relatively tight street. It is approximately 20 meters wide. It can only accommodate a lane of traffic in both ways. Also, it has a relatively small, and that means below our current standard, sidewalk as well. And majority of trees were actually on private lands. And this will be redesigned and reconstructed as part of Polson key precinct planning, which we do not have a timeline currently for its undertaking. Next slide. But I think it's part of the context is that in the future we will need to accommodate an LRT extension that terminates that terminates at the ship channel and with a transit loop. And that is, like I said, to be designed as part of precinct planning for Wilson Quay. So the current construction of and design of Cherry Street is actually an interim condition until such a time as the bridge connection is completed for the LRT and the LRT is extended. That's not anticipated to occur until after 2041.
Sorry, after
2041.
Okay, so in terms of the project background, for this site, the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan and the Portland's area-specific policies are in force. The subject lands are located within the Polson Key precinct of the Portlands. And so, as Anthony mentioned, precinct-specific planning has not yet taken place and is not anticipated to be initiated for over a decade. However, there are policies in the Portlands area-specific policies which dictate the general land uses permitted for the Polson Key. So the entire district is designated as a PIC mixed-use district, which permits a mix of PIC uses. So that stands for production, interactive, and creative uses. And then also residential land uses as well. So policies require that a minimum of 25% of land uses in the PIC mixed-use districts must be PIC core uses, which are things like carpenter shops, workshops, performing arts and production studios, and other cultural and production related uses. But other uses such as retail, office, and service uses are permitted. And the residential uses are part of the future vision for Polson Key, but are only permitted after that precinct planning for Polson Key has taken place, which is not for some time. So for the time being, only the non-residential uses are permitted in the district. And some additional key policy areas to highlight for the panel. As noted, the site has frontage along Polson, and Polson Street is a designated priority retail street. And developments on priority retail streets are to have active ground floor retail spaces in a compact urban form, according to the Portland's policies. The subject lands are also adjacent to the two listed heritage structures as previously noted. So that's the Lafarge Cement Terminal and the Dominion Boxboards Building. The applicant has submitted a heritage impact assessment to the city, and heritage planning staff are working with the applicant to ensure that the conservation strategy addresses any site-specific impacts. And then in terms of sustainability, it's also important to note that under the Portland's policies, development on publicly owned land must be passively designed and is required to exceed the Toronto Green Standard's highest performance measures, and also include new and emerging approaches for advancing a progressive sustainability agenda and showcasing innovation. And then in terms of the project scope overview, as mentioned, the proposal is for a new 3-story Porsche Center downtown automotive dealership and service shop. It's the site has a zoning of industrial commercial, and this is under the former City of Toronto zoning bylaw 43886. And the proposal is currently permitted as of right. The site area is 9,690 square meters, so just under 1 hectare. And it has a non-residential GFA of 5,846 square meters proposed. There are 296 car parking spots proposed, which is a requirement in the zoning. There are 98 spaces at grade, which are located to the rear of the proposed building with access off Polson. But just to note, almost all of these are kind of considered temporary for now, with the parking lot planned to be redeveloped in the future, and I'm sure the applicant will speak more to this. And per the Portland's policies, temporary at-grade surface parking is permitted and needs to be designed as an extension of the public realm and incorporate sustainable design features. There are also 102 rooftop spaces, which take up almost the entirety of the 3rd floor, and they are accessed by an internal ramp in the building. And there are the remainder of the spaces are located within 300 meters of the site and leased to the applicant. And this is just a requirement to meet the zoning standards for parking. There are also 33 bike parking spots proposed, 22 of them short-term and 13 of them long-term. Next slide. So in terms of the process, we had a pre-application consultation for this project in December of 2023. The site plan application was submitted in the spring and deemed complete in July 2024. Over the summer, staff reviewed the application and provided comments back to the applicant. And we've been working closely with them on a variety of key issues, but this is the first time this project is being heard before the panel for issues identification. And we're looking forward to hearing the panel feedback on this proposal as we move forward with application review. And I'll pass it over to Julie, who will describe the areas for panel consideration that we have.
So starting with architectural excellence, does the architectural expression respond to the context of the Portlands? Are there other opportunities to further evolve the dealership typology to align with the vision of the Portlands? In terms of public realm and landscape, do the ground floor uses along Folsom Street adequately animate the public realm? Is the surface parking adequately screened from the public realm? Does the landscape buffer support a diverse and native plant palette? And finally, on sustainability, does the design support Portland's area-specific policy that requires developments on city-owned lands to meet the highest TGS tier, including innovative sustainability approaches?
Okay. Arthur, is that you?
I'm Bruce.
You're Bruce.
I'm gonna go first and Arthur's gonna go last. In between, we'll have our architect and landscape architect. Seem to be the person on the screen all the time today, so.
So Bruce, you will be sharing the presentation?
Yes. Let me mute myself now.
You can stay muted because
Okay.
the mics here will pick up
Thank
your voice. And I think you can also just turn off your video feed as well.
Okay.
Just see your presentation. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning to all members of the Waterfront Design Review Panel, city and agency staff, and I don't know if we have any public here today, but my name is Bruce Hall, and I'm a principal with the Planning Partnership and land use planner, and one of the members of the large team that's working on this project. And we have 4 of us here today who will be speaking to you. We have our project architect, Mauro Carreno from BDP Quadrangle, and he'll speak to you about architecture and urban design. And Bryn Barron, who's a landscape architect and our project landscape architect, Strybos Barron King, and he will speak to you regarding landscaping and public realm elements. And then Arthur Grabowski, apologies, who's another planner and principal with the Planning Partnership. And he will close out the presentation, some development highlights and a summary. I didn't know I was going to be sitting right beside you, Mr. Bedford, but we acknowledge the purpose of bringing projects to the design review panel. And I quote from the handbook, is to challenge the public and private sector to create beautiful public spaces, a variety of high quality buildings, and a diversity of activities to the waterfront experience. Because the waterfront deserves special attention, and we wholeheartedly, and we've been working with staff, as you heard, to perfect this development proposal and make improvements where we can, acknowledging that it does have certain operational requirements as well. And we further acknowledge and appreciate that it is the mandate of the panel to add value to every project with expert advice, everybody here today. So we really appreciate the input that we're going to receive and work with staff to make that. This project is a little unusual in that it's both a private sector project, but it is on public land. Specifically land that is owned and leased from the applicant from Quay for a defined period. In our view, the proposal presents a very bold and transformative one for the Portland. One is appropriate for both today and in the future, even though it is intended the dealership will not exist here over the long term. Notwithstanding the vision for the Portlands will occur over a long period of time, the effects of this project will be immediate and impactful in our view, given the existing underutilized parking lot use and the conditions of the site, as well as the state of the surrounding context. Further, the proposed dealership will have a major economic effect beyond the site with automotive sales and service uses, additional commercial elements in the form of a cafe, which we'll speak a little bit more about, and close to 100 high-paying jobs and the spin-off effects of it. Outside of the Portlands, the relocation of the Port Center downtown to this location has and will continue to serve to unlock other key lands that will help to facilitate and expedite implementation of other major important city or provincial initiatives. The dealership has been at several locations and it has moved on from those locations, in some cases voluntarily, in other cases imposed. But each time it's moved, it's allowed those lands to be unlocked to implement other major infrastructure initiatives, particularly the Corktown TOC and the Corktown station along the future Ontario line. Once the dealership relocates from the current temporary lakeshore location, it will free up those lands to enable the green community to begin east side development around after December 2025. In the formulation of this application, we acknowledge and have given much thought to the evaluation criteria set out within the panel's handbook, and the panel takes into consideration for the projects that come before all of you around the design, sustainability, and planning and policy considerations. Overall, the proposed development has been formulated following a very comprehensive and compliant planning and policy approach that ensures that it aligns with both the longer term vision and the phasing of the Portlands, conforms with the applicable planning policy frameworks, which Alexa has gone over. More specifically, under a central waterfront plan, the use is permitted. It follows the PIC core urban design guideline principles and directions around use principles and built form principles. In our opinion, the proposed dealership easily achieves or aligns with all these use and built form directions. In terms of the existing zoning, the proposed dealership is a legally permitted use, as mentioned, and meets all the applicable performance standards, and as such does not require any zoning changes. Given the conformity and alignment with the applicable planning frameworks, only site plan approval is required. Since that application has been made, we've met with staff, as Alexa indicated, 7 or 8 times now to deal with many issues around materials and site and urban design access. A lot of time has been spent on access and loading trees and landscaping, enhancing sustainability and elevating TGS compliance. We recently met with planning and urban design staff in person at City Hall regarding the site access issue, and there was a good exchange of information in terms of the understanding of the operational requirements and the desire to minimize the number of curb cuts. As mentioned, the property at the back is a requirement under the lease with Quay Toronto to redevelop that within the short to long term for uses that are PIC compliant. So we're looking at a potential office building there, and the access that's at the rear will be utilized for that building in the future. So we're not going to have multiple access points, and they'll be consolidated for that development. More go through that more in a minute. So I've gone over my time. I'm going to hand it over to Mauro from EPT, and he's going to go over the architecture.
Hi, everyone. Mauro Carreño, PDP Quadrangle. All of here in this slide, you can see the key statistics. All of these have been mentioned previously. The site is fronted by Cherry and Paulson Streets. To the west, we have the Dominion Boxsports building, and to the south, there is a private property with currently a driving lane adjacent to the property line. Limiting distance had to be taken in mind for the south elevation, reducing the amount of glazing and unprotected openings. The dealership will integrate with its urban context, and unlike typical automotive dealerships that are set back from the road with parking lots dominating the frontage, this project brings the building forward to engage directly with the street. Also, the building has been designed with its services and foundations contained within the building footprint to allow for uncompromised development on the adjacent site. The stormwater system and temporary parking is independent from the Porsche dealership. The main entrance is located at the corner of Cherry and Paulson. Further west, we have the service entrance. This is the place where clients arrive and leave their vehicles. And the other curve cut along Paulson is for loading and internal use, and it is anticipated a shared driveway for the future development site. This is the ground floor plan, and the areas shown in yellow are retail with two distinct spaces, the showroom and the cafe. Number 3 is Porsche Lifestyle. That is the retail store for clothing, merchandise, and accessories, fronting Cherry. Number 4 is the Porsche Platz. This is the welcome area, the waiting lounge, and the refreshment area. And number 5 are retail display areas, including the genuine parts, and also additional items like, for example, Porsche's electric bicycles will be displayed on these windows. The blue tones are the service areas, and areas in gray are utility and back of house rooms. This is the second floor, and here we have office programs supporting the dealership, both client and not client facing. There are double height spaces throughout. As well, there's additional service areas with also double height spaces. This is the third floor plan. On this level, the volumes were recessed back from the streets. And here we have open roof parking, the certified pre-owned retail space, and service areas. The mechanical penthouse is enclosed and hidden from view. And this is the roof plan. And we have specified a high albedo traffic coding for the parking, and the upper volume has a green roof. Porsche has stringent design standards to ensure their brand identity is maintained. It is all about consistency. A Porsche dealership in Canada must look like a dealership in Germany, the United States, China, or Malaysia. These are high-quality buildings around the world. As expected, design adjustments may be required at certain locations. This must be approved by the brand, which is not flexible. Deviation from these standards may result in hybrid dealerships, which have negative consequences to the dealer. In our case, we were able to successfully work with the brand to concede on some elements to respond and contribute to the broader revitalization of the Portlands. For example, we don't have a road in front of the building, and we have green facades.
You don't have what, sorry?
A green facade,
No, before
a
that.
road in front of the building. Typically, the dealerships have a road in front of the glazing. That is brand standard. This is the material palette, an aluminum composite cladding system with horizontal lamellas and LED lighting. A curtain wall with black mullions and 100% bird-friendly glazing. Trapezoidal sheet metal cladding, a green facade along Paulson Street, and all doors match the finishes of the adjacent materials. Porsche is a premium automotive brand known for its high-performance sports cars and distinctive design. The design excellence carries into the interior with premium finishes. Besides the Porsche Lifestyle, Porsche Platz, Heat Area, and the different vehicle display modules, Porsche offers a workspace called the Work Lounge, including a meeting room and a bar. The brand mandates a view into the workshop, which provides trust and also technical insight to the customers. The garage is fully finished, clean, and customers are allowed into the space. And this is not the average garage, a fully finished space. The building respects the setback from the property lines, but it remains aligned within the public realm. As you can see, everything visible from the streets is retail and the green walls. We met with the city and we're working with them, exploring expanding the retail presence along Polson. The design enhances the streetscape, contributing to the pedestrian activity and urban vibrancy. The inclusion of a street front cafe and patio, which is publicly accessible, integrates lifestyle into retail and into the automotive space, enhancing the public realm. This concept is part of Porsche's global trend of integrating lifestyle elements into their dealerships. The cafe will maintain brand identity and will be run by an independent operator. This is an example of a Porsche cafe in Singapore, which shows Porsche's commitment to high quality materials, finishes, cohesive design within the dealership. The dealership is targeting at least TGS version 4 Tier 2 certification, reflecting a strong commitment to sustainability. Features such as a green roof, gray water recycling for toilet, and bird-friendly materials help ensure the project aligns with contemporary environmental standards, and thermal efficiency is also a priority with specialized cladding and glazing systems to minimize thermal bridging. BETVG calculations were done, and thermal bridging was minimized throughout. Electric power heating and appliances in the dealership further reduce reliance on fossil fuels, pushing the project closer to its sustainability targets. In addition, independent life cycle assessment studies were done by the structural engineers, sustainability consultants, and us with comparable results, well below TGS embodied emissions requirements. 6 ultra-fast charging stations are being provided. There are no other public charging stations in the Portlands, and there are no charging stations in downtown Toronto with this amount of power and charging speed. The image also shows a section of the building illustrating the double height spaces in the interior, as well as the recessed volume above. While the building was designed for Porsche, it is adaptable for future use. The branding and exterior cladding are detachable, allowing the structure to be converted for other commercial purposes. This ability provides flexibility for future developments, ensure the long-term viability of the building. And if demolition is required, the steel structure could be disassembled and recycled. Thank you. Passing on to Green.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bryn Barron. I'm Principal Landscape Architect at Stranglos Barron King, and I'm happy to present to you today. We've developed a rich, I've got my glasses on so you can see. We've developed a rich landscape design focusing on enhancements to the public realm and the use of sustainable landscape features which allow us to achieve Tier 2 or higher for TGS. We recognize the importance of this site's prominent location in the context of the emerging Portlands, the Don River flood protection and naturalization, and the city's proposed parkland on the north side of Wilson Street. The city's Cherry Street improvements, which are currently under construction, are incorporated into our plans. These works also extend a short distance along Polson Street. We've started discussions with the city regarding potential improvements to the Polson Street road allowance, which may include a shift in the travel portion of the road to allow for on-street parking on the south side and a wider boulevard for additional boulevard trees. The landscape plan features a double row of native shade trees along both Polson Street and Cherry Street. The plan includes continuous plantings of primarily native shrubs, perennials, and grasses, most of which support pollinators. Dense plantings are provided along Polson Street to help screen the surface parking area, along with 2 reclaimed brick feature walls. Living walls are incorporated into the building facade in sections where no glazing is proposed along Polson Street. We've also incorporated living walls into sections of the western property line to help screen the parking area. As Cherry Street is one of the primary pedestrian and cycle routes in the Portlands, an accessible patio is provided along Cherry Street frontage to help animate the public realm with cafe seating and ample bicycle parking. A cluster of existing trees will be retained at the southwest corner of the site. 6. electric vehicle and for bike charging stations will be provided for public use along Polson Street. Other sustainable landscape features include high albedo paving for all landscaped areas, reflective coatings or concrete for all vehicular areas. Landscape design is rich in native pollinator species, and the use of drought-tolerant species and collected rainwater will be used for irrigation. And an enhanced intensive green roof system with pollinator-supported species is proposed. This slide shows a diverse palette of plant species, including deciduous trees, conifers, flowering shrubs, perennials, and grasses. The majority of the plant species proposed are native and pollinator supported. As mentioned previously, an accessible patio is proposed along Cherry Street with cafe seating and enough parking for 20 bicycles. The cafe will be accessible from an exterior door to serve the public and also from within the dealership retail area. The outdoor patio is located next to a proposed transit stop and along the proposed multi-use path system. Shade is provided by the proposed boulevard trees and also tables. As mentioned previously, an enhanced intensive green roof with pollinator supportive species covers approximately 36% of the total roof space. A portion of the rooftop that is used for parking will be treated with high albedo reflective surfacing. A small interim surface parking lot is required at the west end of the site to serve the temporary needs of the dealership. Dense landscaping is proposed to screen the parking along with reclaimed brick feature walls and decorative fencing. Planting will be a mix of native trees, shrubs, perennials, again with a focus on pollinator supportive species. This is a cross section through Polson Street, and it shows a double row of shade trees planted on private property. An understory along with an understory of native pollinator supportive plantings along the building frontage. In this location, the sidewalks along Polson Street are at the back of the curb, which is shown on the city's current construction plans. We understand that the city is considering a reconstruction of Polson Street to include on-street parking on the south side of Polson and shifting the sidewalk away from the curb, which will allow in the future an additional row of trees. Sorry, I was showing that was the Cherry Street cross section. This is the Polson Street cross section. Go back. Or how do I go back on this thing? Okay. The Cherry Street cross section is taken at the location of the outdoor patio and proposed transit stop. Shaded patio seating is provided adjacent to the indoor cafe, along with bike racks for short-term parking. There'll be a double row of boulevard trees, along with an additional row of shade trees on private property. Native pollinator plantings are also provided along the Cherry Street frontage, but they do not appear in this exact location of the cross section. Sightlines from the public realm on both sides of the roads demonstrate that the parking on the roof will not be visible. I'd like to close by highlighting some of the sustainable landscape design features which are included in the project. As mentioned previously, charging stations for 6 electric cars and 4 e-bikes will be located in the public realm for public use. Living walls will be provided along portions of the building facing Polson Street and along sections of the west property line to assist in screening the temporary parking area. High albedo reflective surfaces will be used for all driveways and parking. The proposed landscape is rich in native species which support pollinators. The majority of the proposed plant material specified are drought tolerant, and in addition, collected rainwater will be used as part of a high efficiency irrigation system. High albedo paving, either concrete or unit pavers, will be used for all pedestrian areas. And finally, an intensive green roof with enhanced pollinator supportive species will be provided on the rooftop. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Arthur to wrap things up.
Thank you, Bryn. I'll wrap up our presentation just with a few development highlights, just to summarize our key points here. In the near term, the proposed development will kickstart the longer-term transition of the Polson Quay precinct and the broader Portlands through the introduction of a desirable use that is compatible with the context of existing industrial and entertainment / recreational uses that exist within the precinct. This will truly be transformational first project within this precinct, and as Mauro, Brandon, and Bruce have highlighted, we've taken careful care from a public realm built form and policy perspective to ensure that this is the case. As the Portlands continues to evolve and densify, introducing employment generating uses such as the proposed dealership are essential to meeting its design vision. This development represents, as I noted, the first new development of Polson Quay, setting the stage for an active and animated Cherry Street and Polson Quay frontage through our design measures that we've referenced. Through careful and deliberate design efforts mentioned throughout the presentation, we believe we have struck a balance between the current context and the planned vision of this precinct. The current surface parking lot that exists on the site does not possess any worthy public realm attributes to date, whereas the proposed development provides an appropriate public realm enhancement and built form response through the aforementioned animation of its street frontages, the streetscape activity that was referenced through the introduction of a new cafe, as well as active frontages, as well as a strong eye to the public realm and landscaping. Again, this project will achieve unprecedented sustainable features for this type of use. Several design strategies and technologies that Mauro mentioned have been considered to achieve the highest possible design measures of TGS. This includes a full measure of Tier 1 standards and an even greater menu of Tier 2 standards that we are continuing to work on with the city. I'd like to spend a few more slides just to talk more specifically about the portion of the site that is identified as future development. By highlighting it on this slide here in red is a specific outline of the portions of the site being considered for future uses. The dealership represents the early days of the development of this block and area. At a later date, the surface portion, parking portion, will be intensified to the delivered required intensification for this site. So the site plan has been specifically designed around this further intensification, allowing for mutual access points and the surface parking areas to cease in the future, allowing for this development to occur. And these deliberate design measures are not just promises. Through active design and forward thinking kind of towards the future, we've conceived a plan that can allow for this to occur. There are measures in place that we are working with the city to ensure the phasing and implementation of the future development to occur. We've shown a very conceptual image of a possible office or PIC development just to the rear of the site there in the slide to the left. And with that, I'd like to thank the panel for their time today. We're very excited about this proposal, and we'll open it up for feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for the presentation. We'll go to questions from the panel members first, and since you concluded with that last slide.
Sure.
What's the timing involved in that additional, site and multi-story building and pick use, et cetera? And is that going to be connected to the Porsche dealership or totally independent, or a whole series of questions on that? Is that imminent or like 5, 10 years away or what, some sense?
I may have to ask my colleague Bruce to talk specifically about the timing. However, I will say that we are working with staff on the phasing of that through the existing site plan process. We know the parking requirements are what they are for the zoning, so there will be a requirement for a future variance application to alleviate some of those requirements. These are all measures that are being taken place and they're currently being worked on in terms of timing and phasing. So this is something that you know, is happening and is in the works. So that maybe I'll defer to Bruce, maybe just specifically on the.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, come on.
My understanding is that the intended time frame is midterm in the order of 3 to 5 years, and it's a requirement of the lease. With respect to whether it's an independent building, I think that what we've been talking to the city about in terms of that mutual access, it will be a separate building, but there will be this shared driveway and use of parking probably within the building at grade, which is screened from the public view. But it will be a standalone building. Whether it's a function of the dealership or not is unknown at this point in time.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, so we'll go to questions from the panel and I'll look to, we have a lot of the panel on screen today, so.
Yes.
Betsy, do you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Paul. This is a very different type of proposal than we've seen in the last 2 meetings relative to the other precinct plans in this area. I just need a little bit more background on the future of Lafarge. The low density kind of approach here is very different also than the housing and PIC uses we've seen before. So just a little bit more background material, please, because this is just a very, very different than the proposals we've been reviewing and does not seem to be similar in terms of ambition to the other buildings that are going into the precinct plans that we've been reviewing.
Who's best to answer that?
Thank you very much for the question. So Paulson Quay currently does not have a precinct.
Sorry, it's a bit hard to hear.
Thanks.
Thanks.
If you want to
You want to come
sit at the table, maybe?
Actually, no. Paulson Quay currently doesn't have a precinct plan associated with it, nor residential permissions. And it's not anticipated that precinct planning will be taking place within a decade. That is due to 2 factors. One is orderly development. So development is proceeding in the central waterfront and within the Portlands based upon transit access as well as infrastructure provision. And at this point, the focus of transit access is the eastern portion of the waterfront and Villiers Island, or the island formerly known as Villiers, as well as most of the infrastructure that's being included within the eastern waterfront, and of course, for certain portions of the Portlands at this point. As well, Lafarge currently is going to continue operating into the future. That has not changed, and there is significant land use compatibility issues regarding the proximity of Lafarge to any proposed residential permissions within both South River as well as Paulson Quay. So any use that is being contemplated would be considered an interim or a meanwhile use, even though it is a longer duration until such a time as precinct planning is concluded and those residential permissions have been secured.
Okay, any other?
Because I have one follow-up, Paul, sorry. Because this is technically being categorized as a PIC use, was it ever contemplated that this program could be put into one of the residential buildings that is looking for PIC uses that's already there. It seems like the perfect thing to be in the middle of a block and not taking a whole site in such a low density configuration.
I don't know who's best to answer that one.
If there was a contemplated a more dense use, then that use would be still non-residential. And it would have been employment and commercial focused. At this point, we're still operating within the former City of Toronto zoning bylaw, which was adopted initially in 1986 and was updated in 1992, which has a different series of zoning standards associated with it. That being said, when it comes to the interim use planning for Polson Quay, more dense uses have not been contemplated because of the interim nature of development until such time as we would be securing residential permissions. And like I said, that is a much longer duration. We don't anticipate to see any mixed-use residential development within Polson Quay until past 2041.
Just to further clarify, the dealership itself is considered like a retail service use rather than a PIC use. And we see the future development of the parking lot to be an opportunity to add in these more dense, potentially, PIC uses.
Yeah, I'll just comment a little bit about, I could see that happening over the much longer term because we do a lot of work in the automotive world, and we are doing, mixed use developments that are within tall buildings and other areas of the city in King Parliament. So I could see that like there is a defined life to this site for this use in the midterm, and it is I forget the term, it's a near use or an interim use. So that might be the next step for this building when those types of scale and density of developments are happening in that time frame for them to stay within the area but move into a true mixed use building.
And just a little follow-up to totally clarify from what I heard. Interim use, I hear it, residential, not for a long time. Would the life of this building, if it gets built like this, be give or take 10 years, you think? Something like that? Longer. 20 to 30 years. Okay, all right. Sorry. Any other questions, Betsy? No? Okay. Fatty, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple questions. One is about, you had mentioned that the building has to be the same, whether it's in Germany or it's in China or it's in anywhere else in Toronto. Considering do you mind just elaborating on this a little bit more, specifically on how you expect, a kind of design review, like how much of it is flexible? Are we just talking about the landscaping around? What's within the purview of design review, considering that there's a kind of standard template, and what isn't? I know we can definitely comment on some of the landscape elements or some of the configurations of things, but where's the limit of our comments going to come in if it is a kind of standardized template that we're starting from?
Sure. So there is a brand standard, and Porsche has books of it compared to other brands. This is a serious brand standard. They have designed guidelines on how to approach the design of these dealerships. So for example, they have the racing line that has to be in the center of the dealership, and then there's display modules that go along with it. So there's some guidelines on how to design them, but they have to be adapted to the different sites. The cladding has to be recognizable. So the cladding has these lamellas, and it could be 5 or 6 of these elements. In this case, we chose 6 so that we could extend it as a parapet and hide the vehicles on the roof. But we are at the limits of these brands, where the floor to floor in the ground floor has to be 3 meters clear. The second floor also has to be 3 meters clear. And with these lamellas and these dimensions, we are at the limits of what can be put inside. So there's no flexibility on these lamellas, but there is flexibility on the trapezoidal cladding. Originally, this building had that black cladding, but the black cladding goes all the way everywhere else. The aluminum cladding can only be placed where you have windows underneath. And in this case, they did an exception. We extended the glazing along Paulson, and they allow us to put windows where there's trapezoidal cladding. So there was some flexibility. They also allow us to do the green facade. And as I mentioned before, the landscape in front of the building, that is not typical. So there has been a lot of flexibility on the brand to allow us to accommodate things that have been required by the city. But there's not a lot of flexibility on what that aluminum cladding is. It has to be that, otherwise we will not get approval by the brand.
Okay,
I just have one more question for the landscape team. There's a few mature trees all around the site. I'm wondering how many of the mature canopy you are saving and how many are you chopping down?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did a full inventory of the existing trees, and the existing trees are they're invasive species. They're 100% black locust. So we had the support from urban forestry to remove the trees, and we have permission already to remove them. Many of them have already been removed. They did encourage us to save some trees if we could, so we did include a cluster of about 6 of them in the back corner behind the parking lot.
Okay.
But our intention is to replace those species with native high qualities.
Okay, Nina Marie, questions?
Yes, thank you. Just to follow up on Fadi's question, which was also mine. Did you indicate the carbon sequestration calculation of the mature trees you're removing, irrespective of their species?
We have not.
That will be an important consideration, I think, less about the species and more about the amount of carbon sequestration you're removing, hence the question. The second question I have, perhaps, I think is more directed at the city, and I don't know the answer, or rather who to ask. My question is, do we have, or does the city or Create.to have a set of principles against which one is evaluating tenants for these types of public lots? Not only tenants, but land uses before we get to a state of what the tenants are. Sorry if that's not totally clear. Do we have a set of principles that allow us to screen what those tenants and the land uses will be?
Oh,
Go ahead.
yes. I was just going to say that city planning and development review actually are not involved in the selection of tenants, and we rely on the planning documents and that have been approved by council in a review of development applications. And this is a private development application. And so we have been focused on our review of policies as well as urban design guidelines that guide development within the parklands.
Irrespective of whether they're in the waterfront precinct, for which we don't yet have a precinct plan, is that standard planning? The standard planning process applies, is what I'm hearing.
Standard process applies, and for clarity, the Portland's planning framework and Portland's area specific policy are they also take into consideration non-residential uses as well, and there is principles that are general to Portland's development.
And the final question I have, I think was answered, but the question of how the automotive dealership is a PIC use, I think was already addressed, or that it is temporary and doesn't yet. Thank you. Never mind. I think we got that.
Yeah, that's an important point, because my understanding, and I'll go to the city for this, is the PIC uses are what the plan calls for as a vision. It's zoned industrial commercial as of right. So this is a permitted use under IC. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm putting together, the PIC use with the zoning and then the fact that this is, yeah. Thank you, Paul, for clarifying that.
Yeah, and zoning prevails, as most of us know. Matthew. Questions?
Yes, thank you, Paul. I have a few, and thank you for the presentation. My first one is just for some clarity, and maybe it's the city that can answer this. Just wondering how long the lease is for this property.
You would know that.
It's in the order of 30 years.
Is that? Okay, can you hear that, Matthew? 30 years?
Yes, I'm hearing 30 years. So this building could be in use for the next 30 years, correct?
That's my understanding.
But not beyond.
So
Yeah,
maybe the supplementary after 30 years, what happens?
I think the land goes back to Keating.
okay, so understanding that it may be 30 years of use here, has there been any consideration to future uses for what the landscape might might be looking like at that time, including the size of trees, any understanding of how a future development might take into account the landscape at that time, or has it only been planned for this building?
With hopes that the existing landscape, as it matures, would be able to be integrated into any future uses for the site. But we've not looked at future uses or how those would be planned out. But as with any other project in the city, they'll have to go through the same tree bylaw process that any other development would go through and try to retain as many healthy trees as we can.
Okay, just one more question. Looking at the impermeable surfaces, it looks like the rooftop is impermeable. Is the asphalt parking also impermeable?
The roof is impermeable, but we are capturing the water from the roof, and the water that is on the green roof is going to be used for gray water toilets.
Okay.
The water that lands on the rest of the roof, it's taken to a tank, and to the storm system is being slowed down, but it has to go through a jellyfish tank because we're parking on the roof. So there might be grease and oils on that. So it's been separated. So we do have separate tanks capturing all the water from the entire roof. The roof is also our envelope. So we have an insulation layer on that roof. So it is a high albedo roof, but it's our insulation, and that's where we're capturing all the water.
Okay, and the surface water from the parking lot?
That goes again into the storm system. It's in an independent system because of the future use. So if in 5 years that gets developed, it's on an independent system, and that can be taken, like that can be integrated into the new development.
Okay, and I apologize, one more question. Just looking at your images, there's a section of the wall surface that has, what we could call a living wall or vined wall on the exterior. Is that only limited to the location in which you're showing it, or is there a possibility to integrate that into the branding of the Porsche building?
So the way that it has been allowed is they allowed us to put it where we don't have any windows or doors, and it goes from the bottom to the top. There is opportunities to extend it to other areas. Absolutely, we can do that. But for the time being, we put it on the public facing side, not on the south side, and we do have parking on the west side. So we haven't introduced in that area. It could be done if there's windows. We could extend it from bottom to top.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Go to the panel. Pat, questions?
Yes, do you, what are the cars that are parked on the roof? Are they?
So this is how they service, and so there might be some variation. What I understand is the cars that are on the roof, there's an area for where I showed in yellow. There's a certified pre-owned. Those are used cars, and it's a retail space. Then on the exterior of the roof, there's the vehicles that are being serviced during the day. So there's somebody, a valet or a jockey person that brings the cars up. After they've been serviced, I'm waiting for the customer to pick them up. So there's the vehicles that are being serviced and all that. So it's going to be the vehicles that are being serviced during that day. Maybe a portion are going to be inventory. It's a balance that the client will have to have with their operations.
And how do they get up and down?
There is a ramp along the south side. So in the plans, you can see there's the service area, and then south of that, we have a ramp, and the ramp goes all the way from the grade
Oh, okay,
to
sorry.
the second
Yeah.
space up to the roof.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Eric?
Yes, it's just like two question is the surface parking, who is it for? And the reason I'm asking that is, you know, if there's an interim, is there a future use to it? And just kind of, is it for, who is it used by? And then once there's a building, how does it get reintegrated?
Right. So that parking is for staff and maybe some clients. The clients would arrive in the service drive, and a valet is going to park their vehicle. So it could be people that are just going into the building for a few hours and leaving. I think that strategy of that, whatever that parking is, will have to be studied with the future development.
Yeah, and that's my next question is, what happened when there's a future development? Is it just that it's purely valet and they go on the roof, they go on, or you're gonna share parking with the future tenants?
Well, the valet will continue because they won't allow these people to bring their cars into the building. The soil conditions of this area are really bad. I doubt any basement could be done. So I guess that this strategy will have to be studied with the future development, but the client has secured that external parking, so they could potentially move more of those vehicles to that external location.
Okay.
It really depends on the design of that building, what the scale is of use and the parking that's required. There may be some shared parking in the future. With respect to the off-site parking, we've simply secured that to meet a zoning standard. We've talked with the city about possibly reducing or eliminating that off-site parking altogether through minor variants, and they would be supportive of that, and it makes sense. It's extra parking, but you know, depending on what the future uses of the adjacent site, it may create some demand for it.
Okay.
But that parking's not going to be there forever either. So.
And the next question is maybe more for the cities in terms of the status of that, the retail priority street along Polson. Understanding that there is no clarity about how long Lafarge is going to be there. So I think it's just from a long-term vision. How do you implement something like that when Lafarge might be there for another 50 years, and so you have a single loaded street, which is really not great.
I mean, there's no plans to relocate Lafarge. They own their own property, so they can stay there forever if they want to.
Yeah, they have a 1,000-year lease.
No, exactly. And so is it more that you're just protecting the ability to potentially put retail? Because I can't imagine retail would do that great necessarily there.
That was the initial concept in 2017. It's one of the areas that's going to be re-examined. So the commercial innovation strategy through the precinct planning exercise.
Yeah.
So that is the policy direction currently, but plans evolve and change. And once we're able to take a closer look at Polson Quay planning, we'll have a better understanding of what the conditions will be.
Well, you don't have any there's no timing on in terms of when that study, or it might be 10 years from now.
No, it's going to be 10+ years. And I'll just reiterate that Lafarge is a significant obstacle to residential permissions within Polson Quay. And it's and looking at land use compatibility solution will take some time.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I think we're completed a round of questions. We can go to comments.
Paul, can I ask one more question? Sorry.
Yes.
Just a really quick one. to the landscape architecture team, are you bringing in any new soil for the planting around the site? Or is there
Yes.
any idea about? Okay,
Yeah, we will be importing soil.
thanks.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Okay, we'll go to comments. Betsy, do you want to start again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how effective my comments are gonna, I mean, we've just reviewed, like I said in my question, two precinct plans and developments at the same time in areas that we're talking about high uses of transit and walkability. We've been talking about permanently pedestrianizing streets in Villiers and McCleary districts. And the very next project that we see that's actually going to be leading the development of the next kind of major precinct in this area. You know, you look at this image on the board, you would have no idea it's across the street from the MVVA park adjacent to Villiers, which is a Clinton Client Initiative district. It's got high density housing. It's all about landscape and water and connecting people to landscape. So it's just very difficult to look at this project. In terms of kind of progressive design, when you show the brick building next to the dealership, the first thing I thought was like, oh, you know, why you could just make an 8-story brick building, insert the Porsche dealership into the middle, say 3 floors, and actually have something that speaks to kind of speaks to the area in maybe a slightly better way. The design really just seems like not progressive at all relative to the things that we're trying to achieve kind of collectively as a city and a panel in these two adjacent areas. I think that it's just so not the right fit. I don't even know where to start. So like I said, I'm not sure my comments are going to be all that helpful. I said I would not put any parking in, but these are all like really tiny, any little tiny comment that I give completely is going to be beside the point of the fact that this doesn't look like it belongs in this area at all. Like this should be relocated to Villiers Island or to McCleary District in the internal block portion of one of the high residential buildings if it's just retail anyway. It's so much more progressive to think of Porsche selling electric bikes in a little storefront that you walk to than it is to introduce everyone's like no one's walking to this, like everyone's going to be driving through McCleary and Villiers to get to this dealership for the next 30 years. Like it just seems just so wrong. Like I don't even know. So I'm going to actually kind of withhold little tiny comments because I think they're so beside the point that it's just not helpful. So I apologize. I'm having a hard time with this.
Okay, thank you. Fatty?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that you're gonna hear this a lot. I think in some ways, I mean, the design is progressive in the context of maybe other car dealerships. It might be progressive in the context of today, but you know, it cannot be business as usual in the, you know, next 30 years. So, I mean, I see a lot of built-in, I really appreciate a lot of things that were said about, you know, recycling the steel when things go, the addition of, you know, more landscape conditions, animating the edges in ways that, you know, maybe other dealerships in other contexts don't. But to push this really in a way that is in the spirit of how precedent setting our waterfront is, it's very difficult to look at an image and not know that this is on our waterfront. I mean, that's almost, it tells you everything you need to know about how decontextual it feels. Maybe one thing that had been mentioned about looking at nearby buildings and finding ways to connect maybe the public programming like the cafes or other things can kind of piggyback on existing nearby structures and figure a way to connect to them. Another thought I had is, you know, we can push against forestry in some context to say that, you know, The context of mature trees that are almost 30 years old around the site offer something. You know, the site is full of disturbed soil that is in really bad conditions. So anything that grows here has quite a lot of biodiversity value and carbon sequestration values. A famous botanist named Peter Del Tredici always says no native plants on non-native soils. So this idea that a kind of presence of flora that is thriving in a super disturbed industrial site is something we can capture onto. So I think that there are elements within here that could maybe help the team find ways to kind of ground this project in its context in really meaningful ways, knowing that there is constraints, multiple constraints, but I would find a way to kind of future-proof this, to look at the future and think about precedents, the precedent-setting context that it sits in, and push up against what it means to have a car dealership in this context. And so I'll keep it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nina Marie.
Thank you. Again, I have very similar comments. I won't repeat them identically, but I think it's super, super important, especially today as the panel gathers to talk about our really incredibly future forward thinking waterfront when we're seeing devastating floods around the world in not dissimilar conditions at the mouth of a river. And I think here we have a huge opportunity. We'll always remind ourselves of that. So I would like to say to the design team, please understand these comments are about the whole precinct into which this project sits. And yet I recognize that this project has, to foreground your sustainability efforts, taken measures to be adaptive, to have adaptive design for deconstruction, removal, change, to be bird safe, to meet TGS4, to have the required green roof and so on, but to do that in a way that probably doesn't easily align with this global brand, which I'd argue is actually preventing us from achieving some of the unique character qualities that we seek in answering the city's own questions about the extent to which this project meets our design excellence and sustainability goals. But all of that says that, really, as my colleagues have said, I would hope you'd want to amplify the sustainability goals. And by doing that actually requires independence and uniqueness and character. That's going to rub up against with the brand's requirement for homogeneity. Biodiversity is about diversity. We're trying to recover that in a spirit of climate resilience, and to do so in this prime location on the edge of incredible public parks with high visibility. While that may be good for brand recognition, the better thing, I'd argue, is to do this in a way that celebrates the qualities of the neighborhood: pedestrian, walkable, transit-oriented. I love Betsy's comment. I want to reiterate that. E-bikes in a tiny storefront. Maybe there's a way to rethink what the brand could do and to offer in keeping with this 30, 50, 100-year plan for a region that is yet to come. I recognize that notwithstanding, we're locked into arguably outdated zoning that is not helping us with climate resilience. The Portlands is still this unique precinct that we want to see both the potential and, I'd argue strongly, the obligation for climate resilience and recovery of biodiversity. So by all means, use these features, but do them in a way that's really, truly progressive. It's very hard for me to offer useful comments as well beyond what I've just said. And I'll just point that this has to be on the record that we need a precinct plan that absolutely has the teeth to be climate resilient. And that means that we look to the Sustainable Development Goals globally. It means that we talk, not just use the words about pedestrianization and density in public transit, but that we're actually thinking about how this particular land use can, if not by the design itself, be called to account, but the city's responsibility and create TO's responsibility to help us get there. And that really means vision. So if there's anything we can do with this project to realize that, I'd feel a lot better about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm going to echo my colleagues' comments. It does feel very out of place. And I'm also going to suggest that the design team really takes a deep look at an understanding of where they're building and the history of this place, not only from a human aspect, but from an all our relations understanding. Indigenous people have been in this area for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, almost 8,000 years. have been inhabiting this place due to the nature of what was formerly one of the largest wetlands in the Great Lakes area. You know, over the past 150 years, we've pretty much destroyed that. And we are at a time now where we need to be looking at how we can not only build to satisfy humans, but also build to help restore and regenerate landscapes that we once destroyed. So I would suggest the design team, and I know working with TPP and BDP Quadrangle, that your teams understand the importance of Indigenous history and the values that are brought forward in that work. But I would suggest you take a deep look at and use the understanding of this place, what was here before humans, and that importance to help guide not only the landscape design, but also the intent of the building as well. This idea of a brand being singular and needing the same identity that it would have in Mississauga or Oshawa, I think is not necessary in this place. And this could be an opportunity for Portia to really push to be integrated into a deep understanding of place and do things for a reason beyond brand identity, do things for a reason of place identity or place keeping for that matter. We always say landscape is the leader, and I think that could be one of the tools that you use in order to ensure that this building, in whatever temporary state that it's in, feels more integrated into what is now the Portlands, with placing a real value of landscape, not just being an aesthetic intervention, but also a place for habitat, a way to restore the soils, a way to absorb water, and a way to integrate the building so that it feels like it fits as much as it can. Just one final comment, you know, thinking about the placement, if you are going to be putting more vines or green coverage on the facades of the building, you know, the building doesn't have a front for the birds, and the building doesn't have a front for the wind either. Think about how you can use that third skin, if you will, in order to provide places for all our relations, and think about the backside of what you would call the backside of the building as an opportunity for that as well. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Okay, go to the panel, Pat.
Yeah, I would agree that the building doesn't fit here. And I won't reiterate all of that, but I would give it, I'll give it a try about what could be done. But that would mean, I guess, create TO saying to Portia, you've really got to reconsider your brand. And I guess that just may not be a starter, but I could imagine a car dealership here if the building was higher, that you stack the program so that maybe the service area is on top of the showroom area, that, you know, you start stacking up all those programs, and that there you would be able to see the cars on the roof, that you would be able to see the ramp from the street, that it animates that the whole workings of what happens inside this, which is not just uninteresting, would be exposed and be a, you know, kind of a pretty interesting animator to the neighborhood. But it absolutely requires a kind of rethink of this sort of highway facade that you would see somewhere, you know, off the QEW, that needs to be, you know, reconsidered in a really fundamental way. So that's probably not on. And then I guess that's not on. I mean, is it, what does create TO say to Porsche? You have to redesign, and Porsche just says, sorry, not interested. So we lose jobs in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it's kind of a bit desperate. It's kind of a sad story, really. So.
Okay, Eric.
Not much to add. I think, you know, I remember and I think I understand so for example, I understand the temporary nature of what has to go there because of the cement bashing plant next door. So, you know, this is and I think so, not necessarily questioning having a dealership here. I think it's the fact that it doesn't feel grounded in its place in terms of, you know, could there be further exploration of materiality in terms of making it fit better. I remember when I was growing up, McDonald opening and I'm not comparing Porsche to McDonald here, but McDonald, a big corporation, opening its wanting to open a store in Quebec City, in the old Quebec, and then at some point, big fights and all that, but having guts to rethink its identity by not having its golden arch, the big panels, so they had to go and by doing so, really kind of embracing the community, having something that is suddenly a much more positive response, because people say, well, you've actually integrated something that is very different than what you have in the suburbs in an urban area, and then suddenly it's fine. It's a fast food place, but it feels like it's well integrated, and I think that's probably my advice here is like I think that without losing the name, the brand, I think there's more that can be done to really celebrate the location of the Portland while also maintaining that, a certain image that you want to. I think that's something that, probably my biggest thing. On the more detailed, just one of the detail, I was looking at your site plan and the access that comes for the car from Polson. I mean, I think that is something might be worth continuing to explore, because I was thinking, what if you look at the site plan, can you put that main access at the back and then reverse your ramp so you actually come a different way on your roof and therefore be able to have a more continuous facade and eliminate that access along Polson. That's something I don't know if it's possible based on the program, but something probably worth to look at. That could you just bring things from the parking side and then maintaining, I do like the fact that, there's a few things I think increasing the green wall wherever you have no window, beautiful. Double row of trees along the Bolt Street, I think actually works quite well. I think if you could also work at greening the parking lot a little bit more, I think that would be something very positive. So that's would be my level of comments to offer.
Okay, thank you. I think that's everybody. I'll do my best.
Oh, Kevin's on. Did you?
Oh, is Kevin on?
He's actually on the screen.
Oh, you just joined
think he
us,
just
Kevin. I didn't
joined,
see you. Oh,
Yeah,
I
I
apologize.
just got here half an hour ago. Yeah, sorry about that.
All right.
Um,
we didn't see you up there.
I'll just the comments so far. I can't say it any better. I would want the panel to recognize that technically, on the operational carbon side, it's pretty advanced. That's not to say that a technical solution is the right solution in every case, but I just want to recognize that it is low carbon on the operational side. So that's a good point. The embodied carbon is ultra low. I'm sorry that I missed the presentation. I don't know how they're achieving that low embodied carbon, but let's just say prima facie, we agree with it. That's pretty low carbon. So that would be the extent of my comments. Thanks.
Okay, sorry again. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Do my best to summarize. I think, I guess the starting point for me is looking at the place, the location, Polson Street, the precinct, industrial heritage, and we've heard from many people that that's the reality. Is probably going to not change for quite a while. And the precinct plan is maybe 10 years away. However, at one point, if this gets built as is, the lease will be up and other uses will be considered. So I think the starting point you've heard from many people is that 30 years is really not interim. I mean, interim use to me is maybe 5 years, something like that. And the reality is, let's call a spade a spade, 30 years is going to be there. So several suggestions and comments made about, okay, if it's going to be there, and I know it's permitted use as of right, how do you make it more in sync, more of a fit with the context of what's there and what will continue to evolve on the Polson Street precinct? And, you've heard suggestions about, first of all, I'll start with the landscaping. Most people have expressed appreciation for the treatment. Lead with landscape is the sort of operative word of Waterfront Toronto, and I think more of that is absolutely welcome. Comment made about respecting the mature trees that have managed to tough it out and that terrible soil condition there, and to amplify the sustainability goals. All those things I think are admirable. But in terms of how can you crack the nut, I guess, of that this design has to look like Singapore, has to look like Mississauga, et cetera, et cetera. And I appreciate that's a typical corporate response, but there's got to be a better way. And I think you can have the elements of the Porsche identity with more attention to the unique identity of where the hell it is. It's on the waterfront, you know, and there's going to be a transit line right to the front door. And it's going to change over time. And a suggestion was made at the beginning, and that's sort of where I started with one of my questions. I wonder about, you know, that new building that's supposed to come later in the back. I wrote down, you said perhaps in 3 to 5 years, something like that. Was it under consideration to in fact have all this done at once with you know, an industrial heritage kind of building, yeah, with the Porsche identity on it, et cetera, but and to have it in a multi-story building with all these uses integrated, so it looks like it fits in a lot more and belongs a lot more. And from what I've heard, that doesn't appear to be in the cards. But I have to ask: is there nowhere on Earth where there's a Porsche dealership that looks different than any of these?
I mean, there's variation.
There must be.
Yeah, so there would be, as you're mentioning already, developments where the building has been constructed and then it has to be adapted to go inside.
Yeah.
But those are hybrid dealerships. So that affects the client because they get a lower allocation of vehicles. It's just a downgrade in the concession that they have. So it really affects the relationship that they have with Porsche, and I'm not 100% of all the implications, but it is a lesser view. So, for example, if they exhibit Porsches in the airport or in another type of building, it is a hybrid dealership and it's a lower grade type of dealership.
This could be a unique thing in the world right here. This opportunity to
Yes.
break through that quite seriously, because I think all of us have said collectively, you know, we're wrestling with the transformation of the waterfront, and the indigenous past that Matthew referred to that has been occupied by these lands by indigenous communities is really, really important to dive into. But in terms of, you know, the ongoing redevelopment process that will continue here, and it will eventually happen on the whole precinct of Polson Street, even with Lafarge still being there. You know, a use like this can fit, but we want it to fit into that emerging and future context more than when you look at the image. It does honestly look like you're driving on the 401 and you see a car dealer. You know, with the greatest respect, it just feels like it's in the wrong place. You've heard that from many people. So we would urge you to, in fact, revisit these comments in the context of how do you future-proof this? How do you make this more in keeping with the present and future and emerging context of the Polson Street precinct? Another comment was made about the need for the precinct plan, and the staff said probably the precinct plan is not coming forward for another 10 years. That's probably accurate. But the reality is, you know, we need it, and we need it as soon as possible. But this has to fit within that existing context as well. And one of your earlier slides said, what was it, Dominion box building next, the industrial building, obviously Lafarge and another industrial building. I mean, that's the context of it. So we would urge you to revisit that standardization and try and make those changes that can actually bring some identity to this and respect the unique place that it's in. So I think I'll go back to one last comment, which relates to the vision. and the context of the waterfront is one of the descriptions of what staff was looking for is compact urban form. And this doesn't feel like compact urban form. It feels the opposite. And I think there's ways to achieve that, given all the comments that you've heard today. So it's only here for issues ID, but we would urge you strongly to take another real hard look at that and see if you can't crack the nut. Because as Eric said, you know, with other large corporations, this has been done, and I think it's possible. So I think those are basically the nature of the comments that you've heard. I give you an opportunity to respond.
Thank you for all very good suggestions and comments. I think, you know, with respect to the, and I'm not trying to dodge this, but with respect to the relationship with the brand that's sort of done between our client and Porsche and Creatio, we can certainly take those things back. How that gets reconciled, I don't know. With respect to some of the aspirations around, you know, a larger, taller building and, you know, a more intense building, you know, I think that our client will certainly make investments when they had a much longer term, you know, ownership of the land and optimizing it in that way. When it's a lease over a period of time, that's an economic decision they have to make. I know that's not necessarily an urban design or planning kind of answer, but I think that gets kind of reconciled with that investment.
Well, I think we understand that. And as many panel members said, you know, we're here to comment on urban design and sustainability and transformation of waterfront lands, and that's our priority. So I hope the comments are helpful and that take another hard look. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, we're back. Welcome, everyone. It is just before 2 o'clock. Next item on the agenda, Waterfront East LRT Queens Quay Extension. This is detailed design. And Katia will do an introduction, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Katia Zapatelli. I'm the Assistant Project Manager of Transportation at the Planning and Design team here at Waterfront Toronto. I'm here today to give an update on the 60% design for the segment 2 early works of the Queens Quay East extension of the Waterfront East LRT. So I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the project, so we'll just give a broad overview of the Waterfront East LRT, the different components, and what we'll be focusing on today. So the Waterfront East LRT, the Wellert, is planned to extend higher order transit service from Union Station to Villiers Island to connect connectivity across the eastern waterfront. It's estimated to connect thousands of residents, create thousands of jobs, and serve 53,000 passengers per day, which would make it one of the most popular routes on the TTC surface network. This project consists of 3 segments. So segment 1, there in red, is the underground Union Station connection and portals. Segment 2, which will be the focus of today, is the Queens Quay East reconstruction and extension. So as part of this segment are the early works, the Young Slip Lakeville and the Queens Quay East extension, which really enable the rest of the project to proceed and are advancing to 60% design. And finally, in green is segment 3, the Cherry North connection and portal, the Villiers South connection. So segment 1 are the underground works and the construction of a new portal, which will bring the streetcars from the underground at Union Station to the surface of Queens Quay, just east of Bay. These works are being led by the city and the TTC and have been designed to 30%. Segment 2, again, the focus of today is the Queens Quay East reconstruction and extension. As part of these works, we'll be redesigning the Queens Quay East extension to include many new components, but most importantly, a dedicated right-of-way for the future LRT. We'll be extending Queens Quay from Small Street to Cherry Street and enhancing the MGT, the Martin Goodman Trail. The aim of these works is really to improve the experiences of the many users along the corridor and delineate their paths, to integrate green infrastructure into the corridor and prioritize the pedestrian experience of the streetscape. These works are currently undergoing 60% design. Finally, segment 3 will connect the Queens Quay LRT north to the existing distillery loop, connected south to Villiers Island, with the purpose of providing higher order transit through existing and future transit infrastructure, also undergoing 60% design. The project team leading these works is led by the Transit Expansion Division at the City of Toronto in partnership with Waterfront Toronto and the TTC. Waterfront Toronto is managing the project design for segments 2 and 3, and the TTC for segment 1. And the TTC is the planned operator for the future Wellert service. So now that we've covered a bit more context on the project as a whole, let's zoom into the Queens Quay East extension and its key role in enabling adjacent projects in this key location and context. The Queens Quay East is planned to be extended from Small Street to New Cherry Street. So in its current configuration, Queens Quay ends at Small Street, where it merges into Parliament and Lakeshore Boulevard. Just south of Queens Quay on Parliament, the Parliament Slip Lakefill project is undergoing construction as part of the Quayside Infrastructure Public Realm Works, QIPR. And this is really the work that is enabling the extension of Queens Quay eastward. So next, also as part of QIPR, the Queens Quay roadway and North Public Realm will be extended from Small Street to Street A, which is undergoing 90% design. And then finally, why we're here today, the Wellert Early Works extend Queens Quay beyond Street A to Cherry Street, which again is at 60% design. And so as we can see here, this area is really surrounded by a wide variety of communities, transit projects, development projects, and we see that the Queens Quay East extension is really central to this zone and plays a key part in enabling the development of these adjacent sites, servicing thousands of people and really playing a leading role in the future growth and opportunities of this area. So we'll outline the Queens Quay East extension DRP process to date, what the future steps look like, and what to keep in mind for today's presentation. So the Queens Quay East last came to DRP back in 2021 for 30% design and completed 30% design in 2023. So you could see a rendering from that design phase up on the screen. Just to note that at the past DRP, both Queens Quay East Extension and Cherry Street were brought to DRP. Today, only the early works, the Queens Quay East Extension, will be presented, and updates of Cherry Street will be brought with the rest of segment 3 at a future DRP session. Also to note that back in May, we reviewed the 30% design for Queens Quay with our Accessibility Advisory Committee and have since incorporated and integrated in their feedback. So if we look at some of the highlights from the 30% DRP feedback, we heard that the Queens Quay East Extension project did an excellent job of leading with landscape, connecting the city to the waterfront, highlighting the importance of transit from the city to the waterfront, really blending the urban and nature. The panel supported the stormwater strategies and encouraged Waterfront to ensure streetscape design was well coordinated with street furniture and to consider sustainable material alternatives where possible. And so as a result, taking this in and prioritizing this feedback, our goals for the 60% design was to lead with landscape, create a cohesive streetscape across the whole corridor, prioritize the connection between urban and nature, integrate streetscape with the street furniture, delineate circulation, and clearly define user paths, continue to develop stormwater strategy, and reduce project emissions where possible. So just as an overview of the steps in the DRP process, those that have passed, those that are upcoming, a reminder that today we are here for the 60% detailed design review of the Queens Quay East extension. And so as we hand it over to the design team, please keep in mind the following areas of consideration during their presentation for the updated Queens Quay East extension. Is the proposed streetscape achieving our objectives? Does it stitch together the various neighborhoods? Those of today, those that are being developed, those of the future. Does the design of the Queens Quay East extension achieve continuity with the existing Queens Quay West, with the rest of Queens Quay East being developed? Is it cohesive? Does the green infrastructure on the north side of Queens Quay East align with the project's ecological performance goals? And finally, does the project integrate well with the greater waterfront context? So keeping that in mind, we'll hand it off to Adam Nicklin from Public Work, who will be walking us through the team's 60% design of the Queens Quay East extension.
Any second now. Fox is going to disappear. Okay, great. Thanks, Katya. I am really happy to be here in person. So last time, I can't minimize it. Press minimize. And if I turn it off, I'm gone.
Now you're not so happy to be here in person.
I am really.
Right.
Well,
there it goes.
Beautiful.
Bingo. I was about to say it's been 2 years, it's been 3.
Yeah, it
so
looks like it's been 3.
It's been 3 years since we were here. And I mean, some things have changed, some haven't. We want to run you through today what has in more specific kind of detail, because we've been through the initial objectives and we went through schematic, and we were really pleased it was so well received. But a reminder that where we're working right now, what we're going to show you today is here, Queens Quay East extension. This review is essentially from Silo Park over to Cherry. It's part of a bigger network that's important, and it's also part of some other work that we're doing in terms of Cherry Street and commissioners. We with Stantec in this particular team. So it should be viewed as part of a system, and also remembering the very unique location we're in, that view south of a series of islands and a connection and adjacency of water that we've never really had in Toronto. So the first DRP, we showed you this slide, which is super exciting to us, the notion that Queens Quay has always been this front line of the waterfront, the main boulevard, and then for the first time, as we head east, we meet Cherry, which, without taking a ferry, canoe, you actually are able to connect southwards and into the Portlands. It's super exciting to us. And that makes it the hinge between the central waterfront and the Don River Valley, Queens Quay, but also Cherry being the gateway between the city and the Portlands. And we still think, because again, this was from the first one, that is a real important clue for the character of the project. In the framing, we're establishing Queens Quay as an ecological street with a river climax as it meets Cherry, and that should somehow become apparent and intuitive as you visit and experience the street. And those two things together for us are a very simple way of viewing and judging the response to the project, but it should be responses to its context. Queens Quay East is, yes, complementary, and it's cohesive, but it's distinct to Queens Quay West in the core. This is 3 years ago. This is October 21, and this is what we brought you at the time. It was this notion of keeping familiar materials and details, but with a more dynamic and immersive expression. We went through it in detail. We won't repeat that, but you'll see that some things remain and some things have changed slightly, but they're all built on the same framework of this idea, which you already viewed, where the landscape is ecological and dynamic. So the waterfront that's built in terms of Queens Quay is 1.3 kilometers long. It takes about 5 minutes to bike across it and 19 minutes to walk. Go all the way over to the east where it meets Cherry. It's going to be a total of 13 minutes to bike across and 46 minutes to walk. That's interesting because this notion of consistency has to also always be viewed in terms of, the scale of the experience. So you can imagine that as you move eastwards, this kind of established identity over to this kind of new related but distinct identity maybe starts to change in a gradual fashion as you hit very specific kind of cues. For instance, Red Path and the transit portal, as transit comes back out and on the surface again, Sugar Beach and its particular character and granite outcrops, Sherburn Common, celebrating water quality, which we think is really interesting as a park's contribution to the waterfront. And then east, when we hit the river mouth, this maybe being this cue, once we get into the section that we're particularly talking about, of being maybe the most expressive in terms of an immersive and dynamic streetscape. So the original elements that compose Queen's Quay are essentially these. And the elements of the Canadian waterfront experience. That was the very point of how Waterfront curated the notion of the waterfront through the central waterfront. Trees, greenery, ecology, and granite, Canadian shield, but expressed as a cultivated and fabricated item. So the mosaic paving with the emblematic maple leaf within it. This is how we experience granite and trees. And as we go further east, maybe we think what the most interesting opportunity is to start seeing these same elements, but in more ways. And as you continue further east, that you start to open up the same source materials, but you view them more increasingly as they appear naturally as we head towards the River Valley. And what that can look like in terms of consistency, but also variation. So when we're in the west, we're using fabricated materials, granite as the granite sets, the paving system, the mosaic. And of course, we still use that in the east, but we add the source materials and how you experience granite in the waterfront, and then in the east, the source materials also expressed in chips, which then can become larger, like granite slabs. So back in October of 2021, this was a cross-section that you saw at the time, and you'll see how it's changed. So 3 years ago, today. First obvious thing is that the green track's gone. So, and I promise you, we didn't come through on Queen's Quay on that. I think we talked about how we'd managed to lobby for that on Eglinton Crosstown and achieved it. It's now built and it's out there. There is a why, and it's really the movement of fire vehicles and EMS have gotten so used to using Queen's Quay as a corridor, but it's hard to convince them for the last 2 blocks to get off and use the street. There's a replacement bus service that needs to operate on the tracks. Although we have a hybrid green system, we didn't think it was the best to just use it for that end piece, and coordinating with the 2A team who were doing everything from silo over to bay, who weren't necessarily pursuing green track. It seemed to be like that we were doing the green stuff. The silver lining is twofold, we think. One is that we're also working on Cherry and Commissioners, and there we think we have a real chance of doing green track. But Cherry being the kind of connection between the city and the waterfront, it becomes very relevant there. We have a collaboration with the city TTC. We have a different road cross section. We think there's legs there. And then also by not having, I guess, having the ability for a fire or EMS vehicle to use the concrete right of way for streetcar, we can narrow the road. We'll talk about that in a second, but that does change the nature of the opportunity for us. The south side will have changed, you'll see, but it's still in the same character that we showed you 3 years ago. But its details are different and maybe a little bit simpler. Okay, the cross section that we were at is here. Part of the logic for advocating for that green track was giving them a dip standard road cross section of 8.5 meters minimum in order to move fire and EMS vehicles on and replacement buses. As we move to the world of no green track on Queens Quay, we actually are able to narrow the road cross section down to 6.6. You can see that that's allowed us to increase the presence of green on the street, which isn't either asphalt or concrete. So again, it depends if you're a cup half full, cup half empty kind of person. But our focus now is Cherry and Commissioners, and our focus on Queens Quay is in every other way possible, delivering an ecological streetscape. I should back up. We'd also set our goal, our stated goal at 30% was 100% runoff capture within the street, absorption and capture. Every drop of rain that falls is absorbed. We have landed at 90 to 95% surface runoff capture achieved. Pretty good. And it would be 85 to 90% more than a typical street in Toronto, but we acknowledge that it's not the 100% that we set ourselves the goal for. And okay, onto some of the kind of the details, or at least the approach to the details, and then we'll get into specifics. So the planting approach, we have to recognize that with all this runoff that we're directing towards bioswales, we have to recognize where salt is moving to. So both in winter, but also as the winter melt happens, we're carrying this, this component, which is less ideal for growth. So on the upstream side, we have to make sure that we have this kind of higher salt zone, brackenish grasses, and things that can really tolerate or even thrive in salt, or other strategies to absorb the salt load. And then where we're upstream, or where the water which is carrying salt is diverted around certain areas, we can get into still really salt tolerant plantings, but a bit more diversity. So it gives us a few more cards to play. In terms of how we plant, there are a few things to note. One is that we're not planting in a traditional kind of block planting, you know, where you would take one species and you just blanket it. We're actually layering up, and that helps the maintenance strategy, because you're not trying to preserve something in any one particular way, almost in a kind of a formal type planting model, where anything which is different to what you previously conceived appears as an error to be fixed. So in the areas where we're using the brackenish kind of grasses, the look of these grasses will be similar, but we're actually mixing and matching various species so that we don't have our eggs all in one basket. So, you know, if we chose one grass and that didn't work, that's not so good. But if we choose 5 and mix them together, then we just need 3 or 4 of them to really thrive, and they'll fill out these areas. We're also using a ground cover within that, so we're even layering the grasses. Usually they're just monoplanted with just grasses. In the more diverse species zones, and referring to the picture here, which is one of our projects in Toronto, really the idea is there's no set outcome or aesthetic. So there's a really diverse group of plants that are closely grouped, and they vigorously spread, but they spread together. So they form a kind of interlocked carpet with, again, not picking a winner, but observing that in different conditions, it's always impossible to say until you actually plant it and see it in action, what's going to thrive. But we allow this kind of dynamism in terms of taking up territories. They're all still salt tolerant, but we can have more diversity. We have native self-seeding perennials as well, so things can start to populate as they see fit. And you know, you can even tolerate spontaneous things which might seed as well without it looking like an error. For instance, if you had all the same plant and then one thing popped up which you hadn't planned for, that starts to look less ideal. And then in the higher salt versus lower salt zone kind of strategy, we're thinking about how water sheeting across hits and then compositions of plants or no plants. Maybe it's micro topography and rocks, or having, you can see on that's on the south side, and on the right, the north side, having these kind of higher salt load zones, which actually start to tell the story about how water moves, and then the planting is appropriate for the purpose. I won't go into this in detail. I'll just give an overview to say that in the higher salt zones, we're using brackenish grasses. We're still using self-seeding perennials for a little bit of variety. We have a ground cover strategy of wild strawberries and anemones, and then we have various canopy trees which are known to be very salt tolerant. In the more diverse zones, a number of different shrubs, perennials, and self-seeders, and still actually some grasses as well, ferns. The ground cover, where we have a little less salt, can be a little bit more diverse, including geranium. And then on the other thing that we can add, which you don't see on Queens Quay West, is an understory planting. So we might see serviceberries, aspens, and witch hazel. So embodied carbon metrics, again, I think I can flip to this slide first and say that one of our primary strategies on embodied carbon was the green track. And we just stated that we're not able to do green track in these 2 blocks, but we're still aiming to do green track in collaboration with the city and TTC on Cherry and commissions. Our goal in DRP2 was just about over 1,000 metric tons of embodied carbon through the track. And then with the 1.25 meters we're now doing on Cherry and commissioners, that would equate to 1.15 or 1,150 metric tons of embodied carbon just by the green track, pending the final detail that we end up with and the amount of concrete that we negotiate with TTC in terms of how we build it in tandem with the green track. That's not to say that there aren't other ways of carbon savings in the project. Granite is a centuries lifespan material, gets used over and over and over again, laid and relayed. It's hard to capture in a Pathfinder tool, which calculates lifespans in carbon because they generally go on a 25 to 50-year lifespan, whereas granite starts to really pay back on a 50 to multiple 100 years. You can notice that compared to the typical streetscape above in the central waterfront, there's an increased presence of green, and that's a carbon net positive. And we are analyzing potential for recycled materials in the road and track. We can't say for sure yet whether we can use them in terms of performance, but if we can, we will. So to explain the streets and the evolution of the detailing, again, we're looking for a consistent street. So north and south, we're using the same kind of materials and language and now planting strategies. But similar to how the original Queens Quay has a bit of a distinction or a nuance between the south side and the north side, we'll have that here too. So on the north side, which is on the right, it'll be a little bit more performative and didactic. On the south side, it'll be a little bit more immersive and dynamic. Not to say that those are black and white, they're all a little bit of both, but it shows where we accent our efforts. So, and how that looks in terms of your experience as a pedestrian on the south side on the left or on the north side on the right. And then, if you're on the trail or if you're on the LRT, which is an interesting way to see this multiple kilometers of waterfront, you'll actually get both these experiences, but within one cohesive streetscape design. There's a plan. It was interesting to do, the pre-materials, so I won't go into it, but it shows how, this is a smaller stretch of Queens Quay, but a really important one because of this intersection with Cherry. And then simply, I won't go into line work plan. We'll skip now to talking first about the south side promenade. So the idea for the promenade in waterfront, in the central waterfront, as you know, is that it's the spine that connects all the parks together. The parks that form the basis of leading with landscape in the central waterfront. And here we just kind of take that notion, and the examples and precedents we show you are, yes, they're a spine, but you move along and experience many different things, but they're also a place to stay in their own right. So the goal here is ecology and placemaking. For us, placemaking is not just something that takes you somewhere else, it's something that holds you to stay a while. That's important in the design. The south side now looks a little bit like this. The general dimension, once you're south of the tracks, is about 14 to 16 meters. And in addition to that, there'll be setbacks, which could have patios or additional pedestrian space. The general kind of mobility area, when we showed you a schematic, it was about 3 meters. We now have about a 4 meter zone, just to make sure that we're accommodating the kind of crowds we expect and hope to see here. But we think maybe the different thing to a usual kind of streetscape, which is kind of stripes of things, very linear, is this one will have a bit of an ebb and flow to it. So as you experience the street, you can experience either that kind of straight shot down the kind of clear way, but you also have space to stay and enjoy the street in its own right. That's the ebb or the flow. And that's a pretty generous kind of area. It varies between 7 and 9 meters, depending on the alignment of the LRT through those zones. And then, of course, it's added to where we have setbacks. So a pretty generous dimension to the public realm, and again 14 to 16 meters, because we really think of the south side as including the promenade just as it does within the central waterfront. And in winter, you know, having a character in its own right, but it's not simply defined by planting. And then, you know, if you have a flat area of ground or a rectangle that has plants in, it's literally just a flat area of ground in the winter. We're using microtopography, rocks and more dynamic shapes to make a more interesting landscape throughout the year here. And again, just some views of how you experience it and how you can kind of be on the escalator, or you can take a step off of it, sit down and relax and enjoy the landscape and the streetscape. So right, corresponding route. How we create the edges. Okay, so last time we showed you, we had a notion that we were going to use like a curb edge on all the plants. It's important, as you know, to protect a curb, to protect a planter from damage, people, but especially snowplows. It started to seem a little odd doing that strategy and making a more complicated thing, this kind of leaf tip curb that we showed you at Schematic. More complicated maybe than the mosaic, because the mosaic and the granite paving system is all made with the same unit. So we backed off from that. It didn't feel like the right fit. And now it's, you know, you'll notice from the wave decks, just a simple rail strategy, which just where we need it defines the edge of the planter and gives it a little space to breathe. And then sometimes the leaf tip simply becomes an expression of just space, and we actually just use the rocks and the granite outcrop we were talking about to define that kind of 4 meter plus zone. And it also then works with soil strategy, because rather than planting very specific things right up to the edge, we can have more of an absorption zone for that soil. How it looks like, some of the things we start to do is, right, rather than it all being within that kind of curved and contained planter, started to bring planting into the ground zone in more kind of immersive ways, where they joined the ground plane. Actually quite similar to the central waterfront, but without formalized grate. Some more views. And how that kind of plays with, again, the really recognizable leaf motif, either it's the edge of it or it's the internalized area of the leaf, how you experience the trail. A little bit different than how you experience in the central waterfront. The central waterfront is still vibrant and there's movement in every other way. You're kind of on guard here. There's just a little bit more respite, but it's still a very kind of urban and open condition. As you meet an intersection, as you meet the granite outcrop, slight rise. Here, how we plant trees, and like we actually have a mid-block connection now. It was suggested last time. I don't think it was in the comments, but we're experimenting with, like, maybe we don't have a full block as separated by planting, but we actually have a connection and we plant it like this with these understory trees at the threshold, and how you experience that. And then again in winter, so again, it has character and a little bit of dynamism in any season. We think that's super important when we start getting into more diverse planting zones like this, but they're not just viewed in terms of the plants. a little bit more development of the detail, but we discussed last time this notion of as you face westwards towards the more formalized and crafted landscape of the central waterfront, that we take the granite outcrop and we actually shape it into a leaf tip, which becomes a seating element within the landscape and an invitation to explore and occupy the landscape. The top left picture is the way that we did benches in the central waterfront. And again, just based on the kind of openness and the flat and the movement, but it's a backless bench. You can experience either way. Here we think it's more relevant if we're asking people to consider this more as a place to stay, we put a back on the bench. And that if people want to sit there for a while, that they feel comfortable doing so. We're working with the original West State Detail team, who are adding an armrest on it, which we think is another good addition, but it's just a little bit easier to get in and out of. But again, the intention is you stay a while, and then following our conversation with the accessibility review committee, we actually added breaks in the bench, more so to give people the opportunity for companion seating. We've done it at the end of the bench, but also in the middle, so people don't feel it's on the edge. And we've split the bench in a 2/3, 1/3 kind of arrangement. In terms of lighting, it will be consistent right away across the waterfront, so we're coordinating that with the other team as well. We'll still have the beloved wooden pole on the south side within the promenade area, and on the north side it'll be Capella pole on a steel, sorry, a Capella fixture on a steel pole. We are interested in, although we provided the functional light on the south side through the wooden pole, we actually think it'd be kind of cool to also bring another level of light and accent to the microtopography and the more layered planting. On the left, that's a present image, but on the right, that's a test we did in the music gardens, where it's kind of thing, if we did it, we wouldn't be able to really draw it. We'd just purchase the equipment, and then we'd actually get out there and we would do it in real terms, based on the kind of planting and topography we have. I'm only going quick because I know we have a certain amount of time. Hopefully it's legible.
I think you have around 5 minutes.
5 minutes is perfect, thank you. And then the north side. Okay, so we showed you this on the first DLP session, but it's so relevant when you're working next to a lake to be aware that, and you'll be aware that there's been numerous studies done now that show next to urban areas, we're starting to salinate freshwater lakes. Salinate them. So, you know, that's something we keep in mind, and it's not just that we deal with it, but we also recognize that through the design, so that the passage of water is understood. It doesn't simply vanish down a drain and then get washed out into a lake, but you actually understand that water is falling within a landscape, and then make people care about it and understand it. So with that, and it's relevant to the south side of the north as well, particularly relevant to maybe some of the north side expressions, some precedent examples, some of which are my photos I visited, which, you know, the basic thing here is that beyond just being performative, they're also didactic. You can tell, like, most people don't experience stormwater movement in a storm. They often go inside, and not everyone does. You know, nerds like us, we go out and we watch water flow, and people will see it in the rain, but they'll also see it in the dry. And it's just as important for you to understand the movement of water in the dry, so that you can love the landscape and you can understand the landscape. So these examples, we think, do that. They help you understand the curation of the landscape in very simple, or using very simple didactic cues. So that's really how we're approaching this portion of the design, to use all these kind of familiar materials, but just use them in really simple ways that tell you these plants are there because they're doing the job. And there it is in plan. We included this, so again, it's the shapes and the positions are responsive to the way that water flows on these streets, not just across the street, but east-west along the street. So it's important for us to get the bioswales in the places where they're really needed, so we don't miss capture areas. And then just using very simple cues as to helping you understand as you walk along the sidewalk where water might go. The original design, as we look this way on the high side, I was actually just paved. We've decided to open that up more in terms of planting, and we have this kind of simple kind of vertical division between the two, which keeps the high salt zone and the specific plants for that one side, and then on the other side we can get diversity and far better trees because we're not exposing the to salt. How it looks when it fills up. It's cross section. We still have pick up and drop off on the street, so that'll be in between the bioswales. For the minimum number of cars we think we need for the street to function. And it's not parking, it is literally just pick up and drop off on the street. We'll still have this kind of rhythm of trees on the north side. We think on the north side, instead of having the same kind of really layered strategy of understory trees as we do on the south, we're actually going to keep that same rhythm of trees that we have in the central waterfront, with canopy trees on an even spacing, just as a nod back to the original design. And how we would do that, with the trees in a grate, and most importantly, a decent sized hole so that the trees have room to spread outside of a root flare, and all that amazing soil they're getting allows them to grow as big as we would have. And that's exactly 5 minutes, and that's what we want. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll go to questions from panel members. We'll start here first, Pat.
The boulevard or the green space that separates the travel lanes from the LRT, you're gonna say, what is it, TTC is saying you can't plant in it?
Yeah, let's go to that again. So here we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
But not saying.
Not the green, no, the actual separating.
Oh, here?
The bioswale there, yeah.
No, we can plant that.
You can put trees there.
Typically, we're not putting trees, it's a little bit narrow. It's about 1.5 meters, and it's a high salt zone. So, you know, that's where we're focusing most of the salt load. So it would probably kill most trees. But actually, let me show you the
In some
plan.
places
There are
give
places
it a
we're
little
putting
bit.
trees as well. Here we go. The zone here next to the platform, it widens out, and we actually are putting trees as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's a zone but never had planting on the central waterfront, but we think we can, where we have the space.
You can't do it in 1.5 meters.
I think 1.5 meters plus the high salt load. I don't think so. I mean,
sounds like it's right at the edge.
If I'm wrong, well, everything's on the edge because you never know. Like, there's no rule, right? But you know that a tree's root ball is about 900. You know, you could fit it in a 1.5 meter space. You know that you're directing most of the salt load off the road into it. If we could, we would. And if you think we could try, as long as we had, like, I think the way we do landscape now is we try, right? Because we don't have answers like a glazing expert to tell you the value of the installation on that glazing, but I can't tell you if it will. I suspect it won't based on experience.
But isn't there a tree in the world that could kind of manage? There are special trees. Anyway,
I don't know.
later.
I mean, yeah. Salt is a real Achilles heel for a tree, but if people thought it was a good idea to try, I have nothing against tree.
Is there also an opportunity at certain times of the year, and it would be a maintenance thing, and I know nobody can maintain anything, that you can flush those planters out, that you can go in with like a serious hose and flush out the salt?
Yeah, people do that as well. It's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions?
That's it.
Eric?
I have 2 questions. How do you envision some of the planting looks very elaborated. Like, how do you imagine the maintenance and who?
Yeah. The who will be the city. I think it's elaborate is a good word and a fair word. We're saying diverse and mixed, so that the hardest thing to maintain is something that you want to look the same. because every time it changes, you have to reset it because it doesn't meet your expectations. So we're doing two things. One is that we're mixing everything so that we know we'll have some species success and some, maybe even some failure, so that you don't notice the failure, but also that the landscape can evolve over time.
Yeah.
So you're not editing it to keep it the same as it was originally planted, you're allowing it to evolve, which helps with maintenance because you aren't preserving a thing, you're just nudging it along. But there will be maintenance. And the city, I think, knows that the savings they make in terms of making green infrastructure and saving on pipes and hard infrastructure will need to accept at some point that goes into some maintenance. There is no maintenance landscape in an urban environment. And I think we might have landscape architects and maybe misled people there.
Okay. And I'm just looking at some of your drawings, and can you remind me the maple leaf pattern on the, I guess the west part, the Queens Quay, is there some on the north side, or is it strictly on the south side? Because I've noticed some of your drawings have some on the north side, and then doesn't sometimes on the north side, depending on, I think, between the 30 and your 60%.
Yeah, the great debate. The original plan, what's built in the central waterfront is mosaic on the south side, none on the north side. There is no mosaic on the north side. We wondered about doing that on the north side here as you get closer to the river. What we settled on currently is 60%. Is that at major intersection we'd hopscotch from mosaic over to the north side.
The intersection themselves.
Yeah, so Cherry, maybe Parliament. That's our working theory now, is like maybe roll out carpet, maybe Jarvis, retrofit, who knows? But it's like those moments where you're bridging.
And in the last one, in the length, my understanding on the south side is the kind of these granite outrock. You're picking moment. It's not like the entire length. It's like there's like in a couple of places and then different pattern. It was a little bit hard to read.
Yeah, the big ones moments, smaller ones more moments, but moments. Yeah, it's not like moments.
Okay.
Okay, go to our panel. Nina Marie, you want to follow up? Yep, you hear me?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, my mic is a bit of delay. Thank you so much. Just a couple quick questions that are mostly thinking ahead to when this project is in place. I'm thinking about your plant supply, and I'm very appreciating the combination of layering. And some of these species are, here's the question. Is it possible, or do you have an idea of the sourcing for these types of plantings which will be needed in en masse, really, over time? Is this something that we imagine a new market for locally, or is this something with whom you're already working with locally genetically adapted supply? Maybe just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, we're not at that stage yet, but yeah, a bit of both. And what was really neat to us was taking the tour of the river and hearing about some of the strategies of Indigenous-owned nurseries. We've done that on other projects ourselves, and thinking of native planting growth for the project. Now, look, this is actually pretty small, to be honest. But when we think about Queens Quay as a whole, it's still nowhere near the scale of the river, but it is a very relevant question. The other thing is, we're giving you a list of things that we think would be good, but there'll be a process of like, we can't get that, we'll use that instead. It's not, there's like plants in there which they're not fundamental. Like, we like the list we put in front of you, but based on availability. But if we wanted to prioritize some species, we're really interested in the process you did on the river.
Yeah, that helpful. Just to follow up to that, are you also working with the city and particularly with transportation to develop a kind of operations manual for the low maintenance, recognizing it is a very different type and low maintenance? This seems to be a really important opportunity to show and share the learning that comes from a fully ecological green street that has a different maintenance regime. Are you able to do that? Are you under contract for that? Is that part of the conversation?
We will do that. Yeah. And we've done that. We just finished doing that on another project. It's a key component.
Thank you.
And also making it like, it works if it's understandable and it's simple. If it's like, like the kind of thing you give a homeowner, the binder of just like, let's have a page that works and it's like this thick. No. So yeah, a very graphic and understandable guide, which is developed in tandem with the people who are actually doing it. The trick is going to be that like we're at the kind of leading edge of doing this kind of thing. It's been done in parks. It's not a big deal, but like on streets, we also have to make sure that the answer isn't, well, we're not going to maintain it. So, but I think that, the city, credit to them, a long way in the last 5 years, I'd say, in terms of putting green on streets, in terms of water capture, usually as retrofits on existing streets. Things are changing.
Okay, all right.
And finally, thank you so much. Last question quickly. Salt, any possibility or any progress with transportation services around salt loading? Any changes to that, or are we expecting business as usual where salt is concerned, salt loading?
We're hoping for the best, and we're not using salt, and we're planning for the worst.
Right.
Thanks. You wouldn't know the difference, but yeah, we can't assume that people won't be using salt, and also we can't assume that a business that's on Queens Quay won't. They're sometimes worse than the city, throwing around salt.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, true. Thank you.
Still a lot of big piles of it, right?
Well,
over
exactly.
there. Yeah. Fatty.
Thank you so much. Yes, a couple of quick questions. The first one is following up a little bit on the maintenance conversation. So I saw in some of the renders that you've got a few of these kind of like tow rail, edge protection systems, mainly to potentially, hopefully, keep out dogs and other things that will completely decimate the planting. Is there a kind of specification that you're thinking about that will force the city to place them? I'm just thinking about the park that I live across from, St. Andrew's Playground, which is essentially a mega dog poop toilet bathroom, and none of the planting that was put in place has barely ever survived. And I'm just thinking about a new detail that is kind of hybridizing between the parks and the planting that you would place to ensure the long-term survival of this amazing landscape you're proposing.
Just, I want to make sure I understand the question. Is the question about what we're proposing, or is it about how it
Is there, are you imagining, so there's the kind of maintenance manual that the city was supposed to sort of place for parks, and then there's the actual protective mechanisms like a tow rail, a kind of, they kind of appear in some of the renders. It looks like a little, like a wire along spikes that just makes sure that dogs don't get in there, hopefully. Is that a detail that you're considering consistently across, or is that just in the renders? I just want to make sure it's there.
Let's see. Yes, we're proposing edge protection in terms of sometimes boulders and sometimes the rail, and it's subtle, but it's something. Again, it's parks get really hit. Some parks, others don't, in terms of dog use. Streets a bit less. We expect the odd dog here and there. Yeah, totally. They'll find their way in. Someone will find their way in. It's not hermetically sealing it. So what we did is just go and loop around a lot of various streetscapes in Toronto and see how they're faring in different conditions, and apply the same best logic here. Yeah,
okay,
but
and
we
I have another. Yeah,
suggest.
sorry. I have another question about the sort of granite outcrops. I'm wondering, is there a strategy about where they're placed in relation to building entrances and kind of first floor level program? Are they just kind of in different sort of mid-block connections? Are they in relation to, let's say, where there's, restaurant or retail service, or are they closer to building lobbies? Like, how do you relate the placement of these sort of seating, formal and informal areas vis-a-vis the nearby buildings and their entrances?
Yeah, so right now we have two, which one is focused at Cherry, so at the intersection of where Queens Quay meets the North-South Gateway, the Portlands, and the other one is at the mid-block. So you experience it in two different ways. You experience it as you walk along the street, but also as you go kind of north-south. it's not axial on the mid-block, like it's not like a formal arch or anything like that. It's actually, we actually prefer it slightly off axis, but it's related to the connection north-south. So actually, you come to say that connection north-south change, we might be able to revisit it in terms of its final location. But these are the kind of things you almost place on site. You don't design them, it's a rock, you source it.
Sure.
So actually, an important part will be making sure we get rocks we really like, just like you guys did at Down Common, right? So, yeah.
Okay, Patty?
Find a nice rock.
Kevin, any questions?
Thank you very much. No questions.
Okay, Betsy?
Just one. And during your presentation, you were talking about how the Queens Quay in the downtown area is less intensive, and then the further you get to the east, it gets much more intensive in terms of planting and the outcrops and whatnot. Was that metaphorical or literal? Are you literally trying to gradate the intensity along this area, or will we see an abrupt change of intensity when we get to, say, the new bit, that one of the next connecting piece?
Yeah, good question. I always stuck with literal or metaphorical because sometimes the metaphor leads to literal. But I think what we're saying is, like, rather than it being a hard and abrupt, like, oh, this is a new Queens Quay, geez, I'm in it. But there's particular character zones, like where, you know, like for instance, as you go from first of all, it's only relevant once you have the surface transit. Then once you go from that to Jarvis, once you hit Jarvis, there's a bit of a shift. So even between maybe, you know, the transit Portland, Jarvis, it feels kind of less relevant to be maybe quite this dynamic. But you hit Jarvis, and I just cycled it just now, you see the ground outcrop there. That's a cue, we think, for the first shift. And then it's quite simple, we think. It's not like a very gradual gradation. It's just an introduction of these new elements with maybe the most kind of dynamic and most sort of micro-topographical version right at Cherry where you meet the river. Did that? Sorry if that didn't answer your question. I hope it did. So literal, yes, but not abrupt. And based on the context of where you are on your journey, east-west or west-east.
Okay, Betsy? Yep. I just had one small follow-up on the placement of the rock outcrops. One of the slides, or some of the slides, that see them more or less in the path of the walking surface, a little closer. And I just wondered about the visually handicapped, whether you know, that passes the test and how that's dealt with.
We're going to present it again to the accessibility committee. We think it does by the same logic as, like, you know, there's generally in every street, there's an understandable clear way, and then there's things which are either visually detected or cane detected, sorry. So they will be out of that main flow, just like a light post or a tree or a litter bin or a bench. They would be, yeah.
Okay.
All right. And we wouldn't use really small ones there, like, which would be annoying and you could trip. We would use very obvious ones. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I think that's all the questions. So go to comments. Pat, want to start?
Yeah, it's just such a pleasure to listen to you and to see this project again. I would so be happy though if you could figure out how to get some plants in that middle boulevard. You know, Queens Quay's a pretty wide street, and it's gone a long distance with the way that you planted it to kind of make it more intimate, but all of the views that you've shown are from either the north or the south looking through it, so you get this kind of conflated greenery. But if you actually had a view standing in the middle of the street, it's kind of pretty much same old, you know what I mean? So if that could be interrogated a bit more, I think that would be really benefit the project. The idea of the kind of grove planting where we're not relying on, you know, tree species to each one be perfect on the one side of the street is, I really look forward to seeing what that results in. And I guess if it contrasts with the sort of perfect idea street tree on the other side, if that works, that's great. And then just one last comment. I think it's fantastic. I think the bench, is one of the best pieces of urban furniture I can think of. And so continuing that, I think is fantastic. The armrests look a little light, look like they need to be a bit more robust, but it's such a fabulous bench. So anyway, love the project. Thanks so much.
Can't wait to sit in it.
Mhm.
Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for a great presentation, very thorough, beautiful imaging. I think it's like, again, it makes it very easy for us to understand, what we're supposed to be talking about. I do enjoy the work that's been done on the cross section. I like the reduction of the pavement of the roadway. I think that's a very positive piece. I think the increase of the pedestrian and planting area is also something that is very positive. And also was looking at your cross section, how you manipulated the level. They're less, they're better integrated. So I think that's actually something that works quite well. I think I'm glad, the way you've done the south side in terms of, I'm glad it's like, not a whole series of outcrop of rock along the way, but that you're picking, for example, where the bench is, where the rocks are, where it's a series of events, which I kind of like, as opposed a bit like, there's a wave deck in one place in the waterfront, so that it's not just one thing fits all. It's really creating a series of unique moments, and I think that is quite good. So the street becomes a place, but it's not just a corridor of rock. It's something that is quite different. So that I think is quite positive. I think that we've touched during the question periods of the maintenance. So I think it's something that you obviously have in mind. I think too, though, there's a few places where some of your low rocks and all that are placed. And I'm just imagine someone like me who doesn't actually look where they're walking, tripping on this, or when there's the snow machine that comes, the very delicate city staff, which I respect very much, but with their snow machine will plow over this. Just about thinking about the placement of these specific things, and that is just a normal thing as part of the design. And with that, I think, I think you've done a great job. I think from I wish you could hit the 100% on your water capture, but you've done this. It's basically, I think, is as any of the project we see in the waterfront. This is again setting the bar very high, and this is the kind of things that ultimately we should not just see along the waterfront, but it should become kind of as part of the standard we explore in the rest of the city. Because we have this is one street. Frankly, we should start to see that happening in a lot more places in our city, so that our streets are not just traffic corridor, but they actually beautiful place that actually play a role in making our environment more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Nina Marie?
Yeah, thank you. What a breath of fresh air to see this excellent presentation. Really beautiful imagery as well. Thank you for including winter views. I always really appreciate seeing those. This is really an example, I think, that we are waiting for and advocating this, leading with landscape with a full ecological street that has a very high degree of, I think, both social and ecological performance. And that's really something excellent to see overall. There's a really clear intentionality around climate resilience and biodiversity recovery, and being very explicit about that. Something I think that we can all celebrate right at this moment in the waterfront, which is where we want to see this kind of progressive leadership. Everything from managing rain where it falls. I get it. Look, 90 to 95% is still so much better than we've been seeing, although I appreciate the aiming for 100. And the integration with place making and keeping, I think, is also the keeping part, metaphorically perhaps, recognizing the ecosystems of the past as well as the social and cultural Indigenous presence. I think that's also a really important part of the narrative that may come out in the plantings. With some more specific comments, I just quickly say I so appreciate the kind of living laboratory quality of developing a salt tolerant planning for the worst, as you said, and hoping for the best. But That salt tolerant reality, especially with private businesses, I thought was a really important point to draw out. I hope that we will see an opportunity as this goes forward to really engage a kind of local monitoring and evaluation of the success of this project. It will become not just an operations manual, but a precedent for how we can do things better to a higher standard. Who imagined that we would find witch hazels and fruiting shrubs within our street medians that not only provide visual beauty and diversity, which is of course the key to resilience, but also an opportunity for migratory bird recovery. These are all so integrated and they make much better, healthier places. So real congratulations on that success already. I hope we might also find a way with Waterfront Toronto, and as the commissioning of this project becomes a reality, to see adjacent markets develop for local nurseries growing Indigenous and Native supply. There are precedents, as we know, around North America for infrastructure projects that do this, and I think this is no exception. I know we're a long way from that yet, but it's important, I think, to have this in the comments that here's a business opportunity. Here's an opportunity to see this thrive as an example of how adjacent economies can work for green infrastructure. And then I'd also just add that this is such a useful and powerful teaching knowledge for the city itself to be engaged in, because we know that there's a movement in private yards and gardens to build habitat for which people often get punished to do this individually, and yet we're doing it on public land in a really powerful way. So I think that also bears some commendation here. Thanks for the effort at legibility. These provide cues to care and cues to understand, and when people do understand the landscape, they will care for it. Thanks so much. This is a terrific project.
Great. Thanks, Marie. Fanny?
Yeah, I cannot echo enough what has been said already, except to say that, extremely supportive of this design. And this is such an amazing reminder of the strength of Waterfront Toronto's mandate in bringing innovation into the public realm and resilience and Greenland, leading with landscape in every sense of the word, and making landscape infrastructure as critical infrastructure. So thank you so much for this fantastic project. Just a couple of notes about just trying to be a bit more bullish about the protection of this wonderful design and all of this delicate planting that is coming into place. I mean, don't mean delicate as in it's not going to be resilient to being infrastructure. But, more recently, cities like New York and Montreal and many other cities have started to find ways to become way more innovative and pushing the kind of zero dog on planted areas strategies. And that's just done through kind of a smart design, and incorporating certain elements that, encircle or encase or allow for a kind of tiered system in which you're basically not, the dogs just naturally just end up getting in there because of the protective mechanism. So the dog owners would just rather go to a place where it's not trampling on all of these elements. So I see elements of that beginning to go into the design, and I just want to make sure that they're sort of amplified. They might not be coded as zero dog access, but they're just protective of the maintained and planted beef medians. The other thing I was going to mention is the sort of placement of these forest pockets and rock outcrops. I think that they are absolutely wonderful, and they're an amazing opportunity to be strategically placed in spots that maximize gathering and social kind of interaction on the street the way you intend them to. I'm not saying that they're not, I think they are, but I would also emphasize these pockets as gathering spaces and be very strategic about speaking about them in relation to the placement of nearby buildings or other mid-block connections, or wherever they are, they become little gathering spots. So one element that maybe is just missing from there that I think we would need to consider is, the placement of things like garbage cans or other things that might end up functioning as auxiliary elements of gathering spaces on the street. So yeah, again, all in all, there is just much more praise to say than anything else, and really congratulations to the team for bringing this amazing project to the city.
Thank you. Kevin, got any comments?
No, just want to offer my thanks and really enjoyed the presentation. I always learn something. Yeah, thanks very much. No comments.
That's it.
Yeah, I can't believe Fadi said the G word, garbage cans. That's like the thank you so much for the presentation. It's fantastic. I think the question that I asked during the presentation was really to get at the point to encourage you to be really bold, to use one of Claude's favorite words at the DRP. Start this new piece of the project in the most intense way you can, with the most trees, a big, great granite outcropping, so that as you're moving down, there's kind of like a little bit of a shock that, oh my goodness, look what they can actually put on a street. They can put multiple trees, and it's a cluster, and it's a mini forest, which I've heard your office talk about a handful of times. And it's a really wonderful, robust idea. I want to express my specific support for the narrowing of the roadway. I think that is the thing that makes this project really happen. And as much of that as we can do is really super important. And my only very small criticism is the palette that you have of the big rocks, and then that really interesting bench that I noticed in one of your renderings looks great because it's kind of made up of a different material and it's sitting in a different way. And I thought that was really clever. There's a point at which you have like 6 different versions of the granite from the big rock to the manufactured stones. And I think the one that goes flat on the ground is decorative in a way that that's where, like, the question of metaphorical versus literal, like I get the literal rocks, I get the bench made up of the small aggregate, which is pretty interesting. When the rock gets smashed to the ground and it becomes almost like a picture of a rock on the ground, but it's not abstracted in the same way that the maple leaf is, it's like a really different kind of like you're saying something really different at that point. And that's the one little piece of this that I kind of don't understand from a conceptual point of view. Like everything else, I think is really working together, but there's 1 or 2 of these flat ground pieces that I think is just slightly conceptually weaker than the other pieces. But I will leave that to your team because you've done a fabulous job, and I know that you'll see this through in a really excellent way. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Betsy. Well, it's pretty easy for me to summarize. Obviously, a lot of excellent comments have been made. This portion of the streetscape that we've seen really sets the bar. It's a new standard, innovation in public realm, lead with landscape. All those descriptions are most appropriate. But I think one of the ones that's really, really important that someone said was the opportunity for teaching and learning. You know, this will be a new experience for so many Torontonians. And I'm thinking all ages, little kids right up to, 80 plus. And I always used to have an expression called see, feel, touch. And I bet there'll be a lot of see, feel, touching of this streetscape here. So I think it's excellent. You've heard a number of comments. Try for plants in the middle boulevard, give it a shot, see what happens, right? Obviously, strong support for the benches, the importance of a maintenance operation manual, call it what you want, so that this doesn't deteriorate over time and the city takes equal care of this. Strong support for reduction in the actual roadway, more space for the pedestrians. A strong support for the different placement of the outcrops and the rocks and the benches at key locations, so that as Fatty just recently said, this the opportunity for meeting places and a total experience of the street, and you move along and then you cluster and meet and talk and grab a coffee, and it's a different experience, and one that people will, I think, love. Strong support for a complete climate resilience strategy from A to Z can be demonstrated here. Couple of last comments, the importance of ongoing monitoring. Once it's all done and everything is wonderful and we all love it, how is it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, et cetera? And what do we learn from that? Couple of last comments about don't forget the dogs. You don't want to destroy it. Obviously, garbage cans are essential. Maybe a future business opportunity for green infrastructure to supply the material. And Betsy's last comment about take another look at the flat smashed rocks, I'll call it. And is that is that well thought out? Is that right? Or is that not needed? So anyway, in summary, excellent presentation, strong support, obviously a vote of total complete support from the panel. Everyone would agree? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So we are actually 5 minutes early. Oh. Okay, so that concludes that item and one left. We'll have a little break till, want to do it till 3:30?
2:15.
3:15? Okay, okay. Good. 3:15, 5-minute break.
Sorry, 3:30. You're right.
3:30.
Oh, well, it's up to you if you want to end earlier, you know.
We could start a little bit earlier.
I know some people have to leave that are online, so,
Should we try?
but try it. How long can you stay, Betsy?
Starting early would be great. My next call starts exactly at 4 and I can just be a few minutes late for that.
We start at 3:15 then?
So,
Great.
Okay,
Yeah, the earlier the better.
all right.
street
Give us
landscape
5
design
minutes.
at a Porsche dealership.
So I will start by saying that we will be joined by the city team and we will have representation from Zeidler as well as Wilkinson Air.
Yeah, come on up. You
might as well
gotta
do this the
probably
right way.
speak up to.
Joining today, they're just not online yet. They will join us in the course of the next few minutes. I will give a very brief intro. This project has already come to the panel once for Issues ID. We're here today for 30% design. It's the Keating Channel Pedestrian Bridge. And then I will turn it over to Elliot, who I think does the bulk of the design presentation. As a reminder, next slide. We actually procured the Keating Channel Pedestrian Bridge as a design competition. And the winning team for that was the Wilkinson Air Zeidler partnership, together with Two Row Architects, Arup and Plant Architect. The bridge is called Equinox Bridge, and we'll see the evolution of that design a little later on. The bridge itself is crossing a 100-meter waterway. There is a significant challenge in that we have to maintain vertical and horizontal clearance for navigation through the channel. It's a very important navigation channel, and the pedestrian bridge has to match the soffit elevation of the road bridge that was recently completed by Waterfront Toronto just east of here. The scope of the project includes the entire construction of the bridge, any structural components required to support the bridge, surface treatments to integrate the bridge, and all of the furnishings and lighting required for the bridge to be successful. What is not included within the scope of this project is the design of the north public space that will be around the bridge. All of the bridge needs to work closely with that team to integrate, and the design of the south landscape, future Promontory Park North, that will be designed by a future designer, but again, needs to integrate closely, and therefore the team has been working with MBBA, who designed Promontory Park South, to ensure that, grades are coordinated. The project has as a core project goal to work collaboratively with Indigenous communities. And in fact, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation sit on our project team. And we have certainly been doing extensive engagement together with Two Row Architects on engaging more broadly with other Indigenous communities and urban Indigenous representation. Next slide. As a reminder, these were the 6 project goals that we put into the design competition: create a beautiful and distinctive gateway to the waterfront, connect the city and Villiers Island at the pedestrian scale, incorporate a living landscape, create with Indigenous voice and agency, embody sustainable strategies and innovation, and create a place for all people, with a specific focus there on accessibility. We go to the next slide, Leon. That's the site. So it connects, and I'll show you, that's what it looks like today. but maybe we go to the next slide because ultimately it connects the Quayside community on the north side to Villiers Island on the south side, and is a really important linkage between two really exciting projects that we have underway here at Waterfront Toronto. We go to the next slide. It's a little snip of what that is. In Quayside, it's the Water's Edge Promenade, which is part of the Quayside Infrastructure and Public Realm project being delivered by West State and DTAH. And as I said, on the south side, it's Promontory Park North, which currently doesn't have a designer, and MBVA is providing some assistance to ensure that we land the bridge in an appropriate way, if it comes before the park, which is likely. And next slide, where are we at on the project? We recently completed 30% design and submitted that to the city and other approval agencies this summer. Since then, we have reviewed the design with our Community Advisory Committee. We have been doing extensive coordination with the design teams on the two landings. We've undertaken some data collection. We've completed a full costing exercise, and we have actually put to market RFP to retain the contractor who would be a sub to our construction manager to build the bridge, so that they can come to the table early in our design process to provide design assist in the next phase of design. In terms of next steps, we'll be working with the the successful selected design assist partner, and that RFP actually closed today, if I'm not mistaken. We will be advancing the project through detailed design together with the design assist contractor while undertaking an exercise to optimize the design from a costing perspective, and ensure that we are designing the most efficient both structural system but also public realm intervention we can. And we'll be working closely with both the CM and the design assist contract to confirm the project schedule for the bridge. To the next slide, I think it's where we're at in the process. So as I said, we're here for schematic design review. We are transitioning into the DD phase following this milestone. Some areas for panel consideration. Is the design well integrated with the immediate context? I spoke to the North Landing and the Water's Edge Promenade and the South Landing and Promontory Park. I think this is something we want to make sure is very seamlessly coordinated. Has accessibility and active transportation challenges been addressed? How can the design continue to evolve to meet the 6 project goals I outlined? What are the most crucial aspects of the design? If we are undertaking a cost and design optimization process, and are there other sustainability strategies we should be considering in reducing the embodied carbon emissions for the projects? Just some areas to think through as we present the design. That's it for me, and I pass it over to Elliot.
Yep. Elliot, let me give you permission to share your screen.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this so late, Elliot.
Yes.
It's my pleasure. Oh, the clocks have just changed here, so it's very dark, very early now. So it just adds to the depression of being in the office late.
I don't know if we promise to never do this to you again.
It's absolutely fine. Dominic also sends his apologies. He would also have liked to join like last time, but lucky him, he's on holiday at the moment.
Everyone, Elliot, are you sharing?
Boy. Full screen. Okay.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep. Good.
Good. And I will say, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to interrupt at any time, and we can pause and just clarify anything that needs to be clarified. And sorry, Pina, to step on a few things you've already touched upon, but just to remind everyone, this is the full design team. Zyler, prime proponent, Wilkins, design lead. We've got Arab with engineering, plant doing landscape. 2O Architects is our Indigenous consultant. Level is our accessibility consultant, and BTY is our QS. And we don't need to run through these again, but it's worth saying that we're very aware of the 6 project goals, and we've kept that at the forefront of our minds since the day we started the competition all the way through to the end of the schematic proposal, and just reminding ourselves again of a little bit of site analysis. At the landing points of the bridge, there's 2 distinctly different conditions. So the image on the right is it's the WEP to the north. It has a hard edge, it has an industrial past, whereas the image on the left, south, Promontory Park North. Again, it's a more naturalized environment, and that will be reinforced through the design of the park. 2 separate conditions. Again, just on the macro scale, we're looking to connect effectively downtown Toronto to Villiers Island on the desired path. Again, just zooming into micro scale, we've got the Water's Edge Promenade to the north, connecting to the Promontory Park North to the south. And again, this bridge is predominantly pedestrian, except that it doesn't discourage cyclists or micromobility to utilize the bridge. Some of the key site constraints that we had to deal with in the competition was that there's almost a 3-meter difference between the north and the south landing point, and we've also got to clear the navigable envelope in the center of the channel. And when we last met, we ran through all of the different options that we explored, but ultimately we landed upon the S-shaped deck. And the reason for that, there's multiple reasons, but I guess the key ones are the S curve allowed us to create a lot of ramping on the deck to navigate that level change, minimizing how much you'd have to do on the thresholds. It also creates a natural traffic calming effect through the S deck, and more importantly, it gave us those 2 directional views, those moments of pause on the bridge. And again, just in relation to the S of the deck was the S of the arch. It's an anti-funicular arch, and structurally it's just in harmony. And we think this is a world first project that we're very excited about. It's a very sculptural element, and it makes reference quite well to Nam Garbo and Brian Youngen. The gateway to the Keating channel, we wanted to reinforce that fact. We wanted to make sure that the relationships between the bridges are there, but we also, one things we like quite strongly about this is there is a bit of a take on the 2 different conditions of the banks, the hard industrial heritage to the north, which is the left hand of the image, and the park to the south. It's almost like the curvilinear network of paths to the south, and that naturalistic feeling is peeling away and coming to touch the Water's Edge Promenade towards the north. So this is just an elevation of the Cherry Street Bridge, which is directly in our background, and just to sort of reinforce that relationship. Both the bridges are conic in nature, which is effectively they're parabolic, except they're cut from the cone at a different angle, so that there is quite a nice relationship, and they'll make quite a nice series of diagrams how that relationship is reinforced. So looking at the schematic design plan, this just shows that the path that the bridge takes from north to south. We've got the seating, which is on the apexes of the curves of the bridge. And I think, the big change, and it's something that we sort of finished upon at the last DRP, was what we're doing with the North Connection. And, we'll come to the end of this presentation, there's a little bit more on this, but what we landed upon for the SD submission was an arrangement that we're calling a switchback ramp and stair. And that sort of adds to the nature of the bridge. This one was never a bridge to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. It was to encourage moments of pause, and that sort of switchback ramp creates an additional opportunity halfway down the ramp to take another pause. It also reinforces the traffic calming approach that the bridge deck itself takes. Now, the reason for the change is, I guess, during the competition scheme, we were taking the sort of clearances on more of the liberal side. But what has been confirmed is that the navigable envelope clearance height is actually to match the Cherry Street Bridge. And what that's effectively done is it's given us an extra 20 meters of ramping to deal with. So if you've got a 1 in 20 ramp or 5%, that's an extra 20 meters. And what we really wanted to avoid is with a straight ramp, it creates a very long barrier against the water's edge promenade, which again goes back to those 6 principles. So we explored this option as the switchback ramp and steps. And what we do like about it is it feels like how a ship just moors up adjacent to the water's edge. Again, paying homage to that industrial past of the WEP. The south connection has predominantly remained the same as when we last met. We wanted to ensure that there's a minimal change as possible to the current proposals. We wanted to make sure it is as seamless as possible. So it's almost like the network of paths. It's just peeling off and becoming a part of the bridge that you would then cross. On the bridge itself, we wanted to make sure that we're taking forward all of those moments to celebrate. So where the two arcs of the bridge come together, there's a moment of celebration. It's almost like the cables are opening up as a set of curtains, and it frames that vista as a threshold as you cross from one end to the other. I wanted to make sure that we're also reinforcing. We wanted to also make sure that the connection to the water was reinforced at the seating zones through the materiality. And the seating zones, we wanted to ensure that it's clear of the width of the bridge, so that the 5-meter width is continuous throughout, and then the seating zones is on top of that, so it sits outside that main thoroughfare. We want to make sure those seating zones are as inclusive and interactive as possible. Large seating encourages groups to sit together, and also allows people to sit in different ways. And we want to make sure that those zones are shielded, and it's something we touched upon last time in terms of creating a form of a windbreak, but also allowing that connection to happen to the water. So a nice selection of materials allow us to get that sort of calming point of respite, that connection to the water. Now, we've gone through a lot of iterations of to make sure that the seating zone is as inclusive as possible. The width of the sort of lower portion to allow any assisted mobility to pass the lower level, to ensure that the ramps are as gradual as we can possibly make. But also at the upper level, if you're in a wheelchair, you can come off the main deck and sit. As you can see here, you can come off, and I can sit with my friend if I'm in a wheelchair. So that just trying to something we've taken from Stadia design. So the materiality, we're still there's no changes since we last met. It's predominantly a steel structure, again painted. We've got bonded gravel on the deck to make sure it's as robust, slip resistant as possible. We've got the perforated metal balustrade on the inner curve of the bridge to provide that windbreak. On the outer edge, it's a wire mesh, which again, it's just try and reduce that obstructive view towards the points of interest. Wedge wire, again, this is it's a product that we've used. It's effectively a heel-proof grillage that allows a view through down towards the water. And then again, at any sort of touch point, we're looking at softer material palette, albeit rust, but robust. Again, a timber finish to those points. Now, the sustainability approach has always been on this is to try and reduce. I mean, it is a steel bridge. Steel is the ideal material for a span of approaching 100 meters. But the S-shaped deck and the anti-funicular arch is creates harmony. It's structurally everything's in compression, so it takes out any torsional bending within the deck or the bridge, which means that you don't need as much steel tonnage in order for you to span it. So we're looking at trying to create as the most efficient structural design as possible. We're even looking at the number of fittings and cables to ensure that, one, we get the balance of that sculptural aesthetic, but also to make sure that we're not wasting any steel. And again, going to the next stage within the installation of the bridge itself is to try and make sure that we minimize the amount of temporary steel that we require in order for us to not have to recycle as much steel within the erection of the bridge. We've got two types of lighting for the bridge. There's the statutory, so what we're looking to do here is wash the deck with light. We're looking to do that within the balustrades. So you get a nice even lighting on the surface of the bridge, and you get these points of light on the handrail, so it helps people with impaired sight to find the handrail. The other element of the lighting is the feature lighting. We want to make sure that the bridge is uplit, so you light the sculptural nature of it at night to celebrate its form. So we've also we've had a number of other meetings apart from the DRP. This one, the Accessibility Advisory Committee, which we got a lot of great feedback. Some of the points that were touched upon is examples of tolerances to ensure that built into the specification that we effectively get the required slopes to not be more than 1 in 20. Surface treatment, anti-slip, obviously, but to make sure that in all weather conditions it remains anti-slip and robust. And it's something that we're running through in terms of the material, the bonded gravel finish, switchback plant, for example. There's a lot of conversations about that. Be as compliant and inclusive as we can. And again, it's the arrangement of the seating. The upper level, trying to look at if we can encapsulate transfer rails, the position of the sort of inlays for people in assisted mobility are in correct location. And so this is a sort of an ongoing study. So this is just a competition render of the bridge. Dusk, so sunrise and sunset is where the bridge really starts to come alive, and built into the concept itself, the indigenous narrative, the directionality, connection to the cardinal directions, connection to the celestial objects, sacredness of water, reinforced, the sacredness of water is reinforced through the seating zones and the fact that they dip down towards the water. Gathering and connections, very important, and it's the moment of pauses that we really sort of worked on, not only on the bridge itself, but in its surrounding context. The reason for the name Equinox is due to its position. The axis of the bridge is set out between the summer solstice sunset and the winter solstice sunrise. This creates the noses where the seats are, and in a direction that points towards the equinox sunset and also the equinox sunrise. So you get these 4 moments in the landscape and on the bridge, which either frame the view of the sunset or the sunrise, or also it just allows you to sit down and enjoy it. And this is something we're yet to sort of develop, but we're still very keen to get those constellations projected, marked along the deck itself, or perhaps it's done with direct sunlight, but just to celebrate that even further, to have that animated deck that people can enjoy and walk across. Do we have Eric in the room?
I'm here.
Hi, Eric. Do you want to just touch upon the Indigenous Talking Circle and the results?
Absolutely. Apologies, I'm a few minutes late. I thought it started at 3:30, but I saw the email. Full disclosure, I think everybody on the call knows that this was a highly anticipated competition. And it has to be said that competitions aren't how we like to work, ideally at Two Row. I think whenever we have the opportunity for the community and stories from the community to really inform the design and affect place, that is always our desire. Nonetheless, it was a competition, so we went in to the design with open minds and hearts and really did our best to engage place and the environment. So as Elliot did a fantastic job explaining the narrative, the S deck was really an effort to break free of the colonial grid and embrace nature. In fact, we're aligning either tip of the S with the rising and setting sun, or the solstice, or the equinox, which coincide as well with Lake Ontario and with Scootinack or the Don River. So I really love the design of the project. That being said, it was always a placeholder until we were able to have our engagement sessions or our talking circles with what was to become our Indigenous Advisory Council. So our talking circles are really blue sky sessions. They're really high level initially in the beginning. We speak freely in a relaxed atmosphere. We discuss goals, aspirations, concerns, challenges, and really the idea of these talking circles is to listen 95% of the time and speak 5% of the time. And we were looking for confirmation that the design that we had proposed was done in a good way. And luckily, our Indigenous Advisory Council was quite supportive of that. So you can see on the screen, we asked a series of questions. You know, how can public infrastructure inform place, community, landscape, make it feel like it acknowledges Indigenous cultures? We spoke about the connection to water and land and the celebration of such, and the concepts of all our relations and planning for the seventh generation, really tying into the idea of sustainability, the land, and also how we invite back in our relations. So thinking about pollinators, other aquatic flora and fauna as well that might occupy the Keating channel, and how we can really improve that, because that is reconciliation is action as far as we're concerned. What materials and colors we can bring. There's some really beautiful feedback and really exciting feedback that to have the bridge really embossed in the landscape using natural materials, and the idea of it being illuminated or becoming alive at night was really exciting. So using the stories and star stories and constellations to tell the idea of place and the knowledge that's embedded in the stars, something that's not so obvious in a city with incredible light pollution, but something that the same knowledge is in the sky that we see above that has existed for millennia, that our ancestors carry with us. And I just want to thank Craig King as well from the Mississaugas the Credit that he sees on this call, along with Dalen Gee from the Six Nations of the Grand River, Fred Martin from the Indigenous Affairs Office, and Vanessa Dion Fletcher and Jason Berg, who were some Indigenous artists in the city that came out and are really interested in constellations and artwork and such, and they gave some fantastic feedback. I think our follow-up talking circle will be about the design of the lighting as well, taking into account the constellations and what stories we can gather to really celebrate place. Here's another snippet from our findings document that came from that meeting, and some concepts and stories that we took into account when moving forward with the design into design development, really. Thank you. Chimigwech.
Thanks, Eric. So I guess just a few more slides, but touch upon the landscape design. We know, the MVVA design of the Waterside Promenade is at 90%. And our current sort of proposal is, with what we've got at schematics, is to so it's a very light touch how the bridge comes adjacent to the water's edge, but the adjustments to ensure that there's an opening at the point at which the threshold of the bridge lands. And again, on the south, the current scope, I guess, is a temporary path depending on which way round, if the bridge comes first or the park. But if the bridge comes first, then it's a temporary path. But just the design of that, but also what we'd like to add to it is, again, it's the tree marker, which you can see on the top right image. That would just be located at the point in which the path splits from the park and the bridge itself. And is there more opportunities in the embankment of the park itself to create more seating zones? We want to ensure that the design of the park isn't affected too much, or whether there's an opportunity to enhance the design. Now, the same as the last DRP, we sort of finished upon the north landing as options that we're exploring, and as you know, what Pina's touched upon, that that there is cost pressures on the project. So we are still sort of exploring a few sort of opportunities to find some efficiencies, and they're just sort of summarized as 4 main points that we're looking at. So the first one, again, is how the bridge effectively lands, or do we still land in the water, and ways to reduce the quantum of land that we're creating in channel, or do we look to completely land on the bridge, on the water's edge promenade, which would completely eliminate the requirements to build any additional land in the water. The deck width is something that we are exploring further, a reduction of the which to potentially 4.5 meters or perhaps 4. The seating, the nosing design is something we're also looking at, whether a reduction in, again, this is early days, a 25% reduction, what that means, the 50% reduction, again, what that would look like. And potentially just leveling, creating a level threshold rather than dipping down the nose of the bridge, but just keep it flush with the main deck of the bridge. And we're also looking at things like the spacing of the hangars. At the moment, it's at 2 meters centers, so increasing that to 3 meters. And again, with each one of these things, we've got those 6 project goals in mind. We're just trying to make sure that we maintain the concept and the design of the bridge as we try and get those sort of efficiencies addressed. Thank you.
Okay, that conclude everything? Great. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to go to Betsy first because you have to leave just right at 4. Maybe you could do any questions and your comments as well.
Thank you, Paul, for that opportunity, and thank you so much for the presentation. I just can't imagine the amount of work that has been going into this project, so we all really appreciate that. I would say that the strength of the project, as you know, as what you just said, is this S-shaped deck, and then the twisted kind of curvature with the tension rods that are holding it all together. As you're entering this cost reduction phase, kind of always think about the key pieces. I love the comment that your colleague at Two Row, whose name I don't see on the Eric, hi Eric, that Eric was saying about like sort of the materiality of the bridge deck being really important, and I think that what you can really take from the precedent, especially the work of Brian Youngin, is making something extraordinary out of something that's ordinary and changing the meaning of that thing. So I would actually be very supportive if you came back and you said, you know what, we have to make the bridge deck a little narrower. We have to make it all one level. We have to maybe get rid of the mesh that you see through, maybe get rid of this edge like railings, really simplify things and get down to something that's incredibly elemental relative to the path, the light projections on the path, or whether they're embedded into the graphic of the path. Because I think really that contrast between the earthiness of the path connecting to the north and the south sides, and the lightness of this of the bridge support is really the key to this project. I would not reduce the number of rods if possible, because I think the fewer you have, the less dynamic it will look. And that is, for me, a huge concern in terms of that piece of the value engineering. And then in terms of how it lands on either side, I mean, your design proposal, I think, is the way we all want it to be. How can you, can you do that? If you can't, the land on the promenade is like kind of the lightest, or you just embrace that it has to land on the promenade and you make that a really big landscape moment and you bring a lot more plant material and you kind of make a little park where it lands and you just take up maybe a little bit more space. But I strongly support the team that you have and the dialogue that you have to date. And I would vote support on the project so you can just keep going and keep moving through and get this thing to work for the dollars that you have. Or you get some big donor to pay for it all. But thank you so much. I have another meeting, so unfortunately I can't hear the rest of the comments. But thank you so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Betsy. Thank you for the comment.
Okay, Fatty, you're right up there. Any
Yeah.
comments, questions? We can try and
Are doing questions and comments together?
yeah, sure, we can do that.
All right. I mean, I fully support everything Betsy said. I think it's such a wonderful bridge and such an amazing team and such an incredible project that even the cost reductions don't even seem to be that glaring to me. So I had to click back and forth a lot to figure out what's changing, and I think maybe that's a good sign. But or very clever graphic masking, I'm not sure. But I think that the main things that I would said, I agree with the idea that the kind of spirit of the project and its intention of kind of fusing a narrative with infrastructure is so strong and so compelling that it would be I kind of shame to lose some of that. So maybe there are some extra elements, again, like the mesh or others that could go away. But again, working with the real spirit and intention of the project and making sure that that doesn't disappear. I think that'll remain a very strong element. One thing that we mentioned in the previous DRP that I think maybe would have been a question, but I think would lead to a comment is, again, the durability of the area by the landings, because there will be a lot of people coming in and off of this, that whatever landscape to paved to permeable to whatever other ground conditions that meet the edges of this bridge should really be thought of both as a solid landing, but one that understands that relationship between these kind of indigenous plantings that you're putting in, the trees, the whatever else, and the durability and strength of that in the long term. And last but not least, I think that the one element that the difference, I'm more inclined to think of the seating that is embedded within the step versus a seat that looks like a bench, just because of the integrity of the kind of bridge morphing into social space, morphing into narrative, morphing into all of those things at once, not become elements that are embedded in, elements that are tacked on versus embedded into the structure of the design. But again, I think this is such an incredible team, amazing project, and yeah, full support.
Okay, Nina Marie.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I have many comments that echo, so I don't need to repeat all of them. I also had some difficulty, had to go back and forth to figure out what was really changing. And I appreciate very much, I think we're asked the question to say, what can we not lose? And what we cannot lose, of course, are the main project goals, that this is a gateway. It has to be durable. And most of all, I think it has to honor and respect the Indigenous place-keeping stories that are now fundamental to its narrative. If we lose that, we lose the bridge. So I really think in some ways that's where we focus our intentionality around those stories. What does that mean practically? I think my colleagues have already made those comments quite beautifully. The durability of materials that could be very common but made extraordinary in the realization, perhaps something that is humble but incredibly elegant and beautiful in its execution, which is really what you're giving us. If there are ways to really focus on the integration of the bridge, the edges integrated into the landscape, the way you're proposing, I think when this lands, I don't want to ever say that we disguise landings with a park, but I think we can thicken those edges with a living edge, which in particularly given the narrative around this bridge seems to make a lot of sense, and it fits in very well with Waterfront Toronto's landscape-led approach. So where that's an opportunity to be durable and engaging, I think you have a natural, let's call it an anchor for the bridge. The question, I'm going a little bit backwards, so those are really my comments, but I did have a question that maybe I didn't hear the answer to, but maybe it's there. Has there been the exploration of a kind of private-public partnership model, not for funding the whole bridge, but for topping up stories around the bridge? Has there been any investigation to private sector fundraising that might, let's say, add support, but not be integral to the realization of the bridge?
Maybe I'll answer that question to say, no, not yet. We are investigating fundraising and have been actively fundraising for some of our projects, but not this one specifically.
Thank you, Pina. I feel like this bridge, almost more than any other project, might have the most potential. And I say that only because I'm familiar with bridge projects elsewhere around North America that have raised private funds. I'm never a fan of taking public infrastructure and insisting that we raise through private philanthropy, but I do think the stories here where there's a very particular quality around it, and I think it's a hugely important contemporary story as part of our truth and reconciliation goals. This is a place where we could ask people to commit money where the story is. And when I say we, I don't know that I'm including myself, but I am saying I think we as contributors. I just think there's potential there to explore, and that's really a Waterfront Toronto question more than it is for the design team, because the design team has given us a fantastic story with a great design to realize. So I think there's untapped potential. I don't know how to do it yet, but I think maybe that's an ongoing conversation. I don't want to let go of this. Full support. I want you to get where you're going. It's a terrific project with a great team, and I thank you for it.
Great. Thank you very much. Kevin, any questions or comments?
Thanks, Paul. The project is just, in my mind, so poetic. And hearing the words value engineering just start to kind of grate. And like I kind of want to, pull my throat out when I hear those words. So when you're, identifying what you're looking at to, really get this project over the hump, I want to reinforce what Betsy said. I think part of the poetry, that the beautiful arch that's curved in multiple planes and the frequency of the chords is absolutely part of the kind of harp quality, all the glint of the lights playing off that, structural harp is, I think, absolutely, going to create the iconography of the project. So I would suggest, prioritizing that over things like, width of the deck, or perhaps maybe the seating areas could be maybe simplified. Maybe they're just wider portions of the deck. People will naturally gravitate to that apex to review the lake or look back at Villiers Island. But one caveat I want to suggest is that for all the kind of quote unquote traffic calming measures that you're considering and potentially facilitating, this will be as a cyclist, somebody, there's going to be a lot of, cyclists who want to use this. So how do we make sure we're giving, we're making that work so that there isn't, an unnatural friction or a really negative friction between, somebody who wants to ride this curve versus somebody who wants to stroll on it and really luxuriate over it. So the width of that deck for me is very, very important with respect to that. So I would, having said that, then I would say the consistent depth for me is more important than, for example, maybe the smaller portions. People are going to love to just sit on this or stand on this bridge in any case, wherever they will be on the journey. So I'm just trying to bolster your rationale, where we need to keep the frequency of the chords. In my opinion, we need to keep that beautiful sinuous curve, and I'm just asking us to really consider the width of that, given I think the reality of its usage. So those are comments. I guess I should have made my questions first, but I do want to ask: are you considering? And again, value engineering, and now I'm asking you this question, so I understand the kind of dissonance here. Are you looking at electric arc steel for the structural components?
So
Is that
again,
part
the
of your
electric,
specification? Yeah, low carbon steel. That's what I'm very interested in the embodied carbon here,
Yes.
and this is of course a very worthwhile endeavor. But anything we can do to reduce upfront carbon is very, very helpful.
it's absolutely. I mean, when we do projects like this, and we start to set out the specification, it's something that's always front and center of the start of the conversations when it comes to sourcing steel. But as you know, sometimes costs dictated a slight change in direction. But no, absolutely, it's always one of the first things that we suggest when we're writing specifications.
Well, thanks for that, and you have my full support. Thank you.
Hey, Eric.
Thank you very much for a beautiful presentation. Beautiful bridge. It's stunning. I think that's going to be another, one of those iconic moments in our waterfront, and I think that is, it's artfully handled. I really like to feel like, the S, the kind of the way it comes in and the whole rationale. I would say that I like the kind of the natural flow of that S. I'm actually not a big fan of the switchback of the north end. I actually think that something more fluid, natural, the way it lands, a more direct route. And I understand, your rationale about, slowing down people and all that, but I'm not sure it's really going to be an issue here. So I think the kind of a smooth transition and how it lands, and I think just the directness of the flow is something that I think is an important piece. Like Kevin, I think that it's interesting too. I had to go back and forth and looking at the images to see the difference. I think the width of the bridge in terms of however you select it, I think it's just requires an analysis, because once you have pedestrian flowing, people waiting on the edge, and cyclists to that, I think you're going to find that that's probably one I think you don't want to sacrifice, because there's it's going to be mother with stroller with people trying to bicycle by, so something to that effect. So I think that's something to really be careful before sacrificing that one. Unlike my colleagues, I'm not as fussed whether it's a 2 meter or 3 meter spacing, but some of my colleagues seems to be feel a lot stronger than me about it. But I'm going to think you have a great team to make that decision. I personally preferred the 3, since there was a certain delicateness and transparency that was, especially from some angle, that I thought was quite interesting. And I think the other thing that not to lose is and however, it's the lighting. I think the way this is lit at night, the way also, it needs to be a veil. It needs to be very delicate, because I think it's going to be something that it needs to be done as artfully, and I think that's something I wouldn't want to sacrifice. And that's those are my comments. Beautiful. I love it.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try and do a brief summary, and I think you've heard a lot of very strong supportive comments here, and many people have said, me included, it's hard to tell the difference between the before and after with the subtle changes. So I think that's a really good indicator of how you've approached this. Various comments made about okay with the modifications in certain areas, provided elegant, outstanding materials are still used in this. I think generally speaking, the switchback on the north side, it'd be nice if it could still happen, but I think you heard from people saying it, not adamant about it. As long as it's done in a smooth transitional way, and that the landing area needs to be very durable, very strong, maybe celebrated as someone said, as sort of a mini park space, so that both of those areas are going to receive an awful lot of pedestrian, volume. And so they need to stand the test of time and be very, very durable materials. So I think you have some freedom there. With respect to the 4.5 meter width of the bridge, I think I would agree with what Eric just said in terms of go for the 4.5, because I do think there will be conflicts between cyclists, pedestrians, strollers, etc. And that's something I think you may regret if you could not achieve that. I just personally love the symbolism, the honor of the placekeeping goals, the relationship to the solstice, the sunrise, the sunset. People are they're gonna love being on that bridge. It's so iconic. It's so beautiful and gorgeous. I think it'll be a new tourist attraction in Toronto, among other things. And I think the comment made about lighting is really, really important. That one slide you had, of different times of dusk and full darkness, etc. I mean, it's going to stand out like a jewel in the harbor. It's just really critical. So those are some of the features that I think absolutely should not be abandoned. So in summary, love it, elegant, beautiful, stunning, iconic. We understand what you're up against, and I think there's some suggestions where hopefully you could achieve your goals without sacrificing any of the elegance of the bridge itself. So I think there's pretty obvious a very strong support for what you've done and where you're going. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the kind comments.
Okay. I guess that concludes our business, Chris.
I think we have to take a vote, right?
Yes, we do.
Oh, we have to take a formal vote of support. I was jumping to the conclusion. Unanimous. Thank you. To have it recorded.